6 years ago, 511 years. Sharon remembers that day clearly. Ethan, who had come from Vallejo to Colombia to study, met the imperial family. It was her first meeting with Ethan, and his smile confused her so much that she didn't understand what was happening to her. It was as if fate itself had brought them together. Ethan made a vow to Sharon. She was sure that this man was half of her soul, as if sent from heaven. But the unexpected happened. Ethan's half-brother, Prince Caleb, took advantage of his relative's absence and staged a rebellion, and he needed to temporarily return to his homeland in Vallejo. The girl didn't want to let him go alone, but the guy couldn't take her with him because it was very dangerous. Sharon loved him very much and was sure that separation would not affect her feelings in any way. Ethan promised to ascend the throne for her, become the ruler, and arrange the most luxurious reception when she decided to attend. The guy intended to ask her father for permission for their wedding, if only Sharon would wait for him. After saying goodbye to Ethan, the girl prayed every day in the temple for health and safety, her prayers filled with sincerity and warmth. After 2 years, news came that a new ruler of Vallejo had ascended the throne, and his name was Ethan Vallejo. The coronation of the young emperor took place. Sharon continued to pray for him every day. After another 2 months, she understood that the guy was now taking care of the entire state. But thoughts about him did not leave her head. The girl believed that she needed to be patient for the sake of the country, since she was the Empress, in order to be worthy of the title of Ethan's wife. From today on, Sharon decided to study even more while Ethan was there, because the Emperor's wife is obliged to know the culture and structure of the state as a whole. She wanted to surprise the Emperor with her knowledge. Sharon overheard a conversation about a message arriving from Vallejo proposing an engagement. They were talking about Emperor Ethan's wedding, and the girl immediately thought they were talking about her. His Majesty the Emperor of Colombia also congratulates Vallejo and wishes happiness to the future imperial couple. After these words, Sharon began to suspect that something was wrong here. And then she heard that the bride was Duke Leo's daughter, Lady Sandra. Running to her chambers, Sharon burst into tears. The nanny tried to bring the princess to her senses, but tears flowed from her eyes. All she could say was that Ethan would marry another. The nanny couldn't believe it. She tried to calm the girl down. Maybe she misunderstood, because everyone knows how long he courted Sharon. The princess lost all meaning in love. Her heart was broken, and Ethan turned out to be a traitor. Ethan decided to marry the daughter of the duke of his country, and surely not only Colombia, but the whole country knew about this. Sharon couldn't sleep. She sat on the windowsill, looked out the window and thought that she had probably prayed too much for his victory. But she should have prayed for his love for her. Suddenly, the nanny burst into the room and demanded that I get down from the windowsill, as it was very dangerous. The nanny brought an anonymous letter for the princess. It was from one of the ambassadors, who asked her to deliver it to her. Sharon's face immediately changed and she screamed that it was a letter from Ethan. But was it really a farewell letter, or had the emperor changed his mind? The next morning, Sharon came to her father with a request to go to Vallejo. The father immediately understood the reason for such a desire. Although he considered Ethan a good young man, he thought that he was not suitable for his daughter. The man stood up and hugged his daughter, telling her not to think under any circumstances about becoming his concubine if he offered. The girl had never even thought about it, but she still had to go there. The father had to accept his daughter's stubbornness, but he had 2 conditions. First, that she step on his foot for what she had done, and second, that she appear there as a representative of the ambassadors. Sharon set out on her journey. The butler met the princess. He was a little confused, as he did not know that she would come in person, but the girl said that His Majesty was her friend, and he would be glad of such a visit. The butler agreed that the emperor would indeed be glad that someone had come to congratulate him personally, and escorted the ambassadors, led by the princess, to the palace. Sharon dreamed of coming to Vallejo, but she couldn't have imagined that everything would turn out like this. She didn't think that she would have to choose a gift for his bride and prepare for the wedding of her beloved man. The princess walked into the reception room and Ethan pounced on her, saying that he missed her. After pushing the emperor away, Sharon gave him 5 minutes to explain how he dared leave her. Ethan pretended that nothing terrible had happened, tried to calm the princess down and asked her not to be so cruel. While he still had 4 minutes left, the guy exhaled and decided to tell everything. That during the uprising, his brother turned out to be stronger than he thought, and the strongest was Duke Leo, who was on his brother's side. The emperor needed the duke's help to stop Caleb, so he tried to lure him to his side. The duke agreed only on the condition that the emperor would make his daughter Sandra his empress. Sharon stepped on the emperor's foot with all her might, turned around and began to walk away, throwing in his wake that all people think first of all only about themselves, and he was no exception. But this did not mean that she was not angry with him, because the emperor could have informed her about the end of the war, but the princess only learned about it from the news of the wedding. Ethan stood there dejectedly, asking the princess not to say that, because he had not called her for that reason at all. The guy confessed his love to Sharon. The girl looked at him with a surprised look, as if she didn't understand what kind of love he was talking about. Ethan asked to wait only 5 years, since he still has not found all of Leo's supporters. He won, but he is still worried. But during this time he will be able to get rid of them and suppress the Duke's power. Sharon was furious, because during these 5 years he would be not only with his wife, but also with a concubine. But the emperor promised that for all 5 years he would be faithful only to her. The princess decided to confess that she also loved Ethan, but for these 5 years he would be another woman's man. The girl asked to be let go, turned around and headed for the exit. The emperor shouted after her and asked her not to leave. Sharon was of the opinion that if he wanted to, he should break up with Sandra now, and not in 5 years. The commander approached the princess and asked if everything was okay with her. She replied that no, she was not okay, and then the guy was going to call the maid to help her. Before the commander had time to leave, he was informed that Sandra had arrived and wanted to see Sharon. The princess agreed to see Lady Sandra, since she had come to Vallejo as a representative of the ambassadors. The emperor's bride entered her chambers, introduced herself, and bowed before Sharon. When the lady entered the chambers, the girl realized that she still hadn't changed her coat or her dirty shoes. Sandra, looking at the princess's appearance, giggled. The girls shook hands. Sandra's hand, unlike Sharon's, was soft and gentle. Looking at the bride, the princess wondered if Ethan really thought he wouldn't fall in love with this girl in 5 years. Sandra started the conversation first. She wanted to talk about the conversation between Sharon and Ethan about 2 hours ago, and that's why she dared to come. Smiling sweetly, the girl continued. It seemed to her that her opinions differed with His Majesty and the princess, so she wanted to be honest. Sandra had no intention of divorcing His Majesty after 5 years. The princess pretended not to understand what the girl was talking about, and that she was not interested in their marital plans. The lady said that all this is not because she loves him, but there is only one reason. She does not want everything to be the way His Majesty wants. Sharon didn't understand how the girl heard everything, but in any case, it must have been terribly unpleasant for her to hear it. At first, what happened hit her pride, and Sandra even thought about breaking off the engagement a couple of times, but then decided not to do so. She decided that if she retreated voluntarily, she would not be able to hurt His Majesty. The princess felt very sorry, but Sandra thanked her, because if it had not been for this incident, she would not have learned the whole truth about the emperor. Having finished the dialogue, the emperor's bride left, leaving Sharon a small gift, her friend. The princess laughed, but her best friend really did help. As Sharon finished her next glass, she thought that Ethan wasn't the only one. There were many, many men. To forget him, she needed to meet someone handsome, with an incredibly beautiful face. In the morning, Sharon woke up with some unknown guy. Her head was splitting like crazy. It seemed like nothing terrible had happened. But the princess, who had arrived as an ambassador, got drunk with a stranger in the garden. The girl was unable to wake up the stranger. He smelled strongly of alcohol. Clutching her head, she ran out of the garden. Sharon couldn't remember who the guy was or what he was wearing. Could he be an aristocrat? If so, then they would probably meet at Ethan's wedding. She didn't remember anything and decided to pretend that nothing happened. But when she arrived at the wedding, the princess was still worried about the thought that she might meet a stranger. The guy sitting in the main part of the room seemed to resemble the stranger from the garden. Sharon wondered if he could be a member of the Vallejo imperial family. The commander leaned towards the princess and asked if she knew that guy, since he couldn't take his eyes off the girl. The girl became embarrassed. Perhaps she was right. A stranger saw a girl in the garden. She was sitting and drinking alcohol. For him, it was a shameful sight. Approaching her, he asked where she thought she was, that she dared to allow herself to do such a thing. But the girl didn't even flinch, which angered the stranger even more. He thought maybe he should put her to bed, but first he decided to ask what happened and who broke her heart. The princess seemed to pay no attention to him, but began to rave, talking about Ethan and her feelings for him. It was Prince Archie, although he was not the Empress's son, and the boy was also known for his handsome appearance. But since the age of 15, he had not had a lover, and his disgusting character was to blame for everything. And of course, it was new to him that a woman was hanging on him. Archie wondered if she really liked him so much that she felt pain. But someone who was born a prince couldn't marry the first woman he met. He got it all wrong. He felt very sorry for the girl, and he didn't understand why exactly she liked him. Archie was upset that Sharon had abandoned him in the garden and run away, and now wouldn't even look him in the eye. He approached the princess from behind and said that it was better to stop looking away, and that they should get to know each other better. The commander immediately appeared and asked to explain who he was. The guy introduced himself as Archie Smith, Prince of Vallejo. Sharon realized that she had gone crazy. Not only had she woken up with a member of the imperial family, but also with Ethan's brother. The girl realized that there was no point in pretending that nothing had happened, so she introduced herself as the Princess of Columbia, saying that she had come to the wedding as a representative of the embassy. The only thing that made her happy was that she didn't remember anything, and therefore didn't know anything. Sharon said Vallejo was a lovely country, and Archie joked that the country was so warm that you wouldn't even freeze if you slept outside. The girl began to make stupid jokes, not understanding what she was saying. The princess hinted that it was time for the prince to take his place, as his brother would soon arrive. Archie went to his seat, throwing in his wake that they would continue their acquaintance later. The commander watched this scene with obvious displeasure and incomprehension. He advised Sharon not to hide her true character in front of the man she likes, because she is so attractive when she is rude. Before becoming a commander, Gordon was a friend of the princess's older brother, and he has excellent fencing skills and leadership qualities despite his young age. But Sharon saw Gordon as nothing more than a mischievous friend of her older brother, and didn't understand what the daughters of aristocrats saw in him. The commander declared that Archie was not particularly suitable for the princess, and she sincerely did not understand why he thought so, because the guy was quite a handsome man. Gordon could see right through such men. The guy clearly had a problematic character, and he believed that a man with such a temperament was not suitable for the princess. Sharon asked if the guy was referring to Ethan, who had just walked down the red carpet in his wedding suit. But no, the hint was not at all in relation to the emperor, but in relation to himself. The princess said that his joke was not funny and turned her attention to the emperor. The wedding ceremony took place, the lovers exchanged rings, took vows, and the time came for the first kiss. Sharon went to her room. She was angry. She had to clap throughout the wedding, hand over the gift, and finally attend the wedding. In a playful mood, the commander followed her into the room with a plate of donuts. The princess ate 12 donuts in the blink of an eye. Gordon stood with his mouth open. The girl was very angry. She wanted to return home as quickly as possible. The commander supported her, since they had sat down for the obligatory part of the wedding. Sharon decided to leave tomorrow morning. She was going to say something to Ethan's face and then go straight home. The next morning, the emperor could not understand why the princess was doing this, but the girl had already decided everything for herself. Ethan persuaded her to wait only 5 years. He hoped for her understanding, because Sharon was also from the royal family. She understood him, but it was about forgiveness and acceptance, which was unacceptable on her part. His Majesty did not stop insisting on his own. For him, 5 years was a short time to solve all the problems. The princess was angry. She was tired of this conversation, since she did not back down from her own. For her 5 years was a long time, during which the emperor would have more than one concubine and wife. The man who was Sharon's first love, the one who swore eternal love, promised and assured her. She understood that when he was faced with the choice of the throne or love, it was wiser to choose the former, and perhaps Ethan would keep his promise, since he was smart and could handle it. However, the princess asked His Majesty to put himself in her place, and whether he would have waited while she accepted concubines and married other men. After a couple of minutes, Sharon told him not to answer that question, as she would ask it again in a little while and then get an answer. A village on the border of Vallejo. On her way home, the princess thought about Ethan and his husband. Lady Sandra was the best, had been known for her good character since ancient times, had never been involved in scandals, unlike her aristocratic peers, and had a reliable family. Archie lay in his room and thought about the princess and how he had asked her to meet again. He tried not to think about the fact that he liked her. After all, it was she who liked him, and not the other way around. The prince tried to reassure himself. Sharon was still reeling from the trip and the pain of her broken heart when bad news arrived. Her elder brother refused to be the crown prince, and instead chose to become a great sage. The girl couldn't believe that Fred would become the next crown prince. The princess's father forbade her to simply mention her older brother's name. First of all, the throne is inherited by the son of the Empress, but there are many cases when after him, instead of the Empress's daughter, the throne is taken by the son of a concubine. Besides, Fred had a good reputation among the aristocrats. Sharon's mother suffered so much at that time, so she didn't want this guy to become emperor. Father declared that she, not Fred, would become the crown princess. All the aristocrats and the people placed their hopes on him, the son of the Empress from a princely family. After Sharon's elder brother talked with the sage, the latter greatly admired him. Everyone knew about it. The sage called her a person suitable for the throne, sighing heavily. But almost no one knew about this. The princess decided that while her father was healthy, she had enough time for formal education. Fred was an idealist. He constantly aimed at impossible things. Since only the elder brother was worthy of the throne, she never envied him. But now that things had turned out this way, the princess had to make up for lost time during this time. She would have to be polite to the teachers and make a schedule, but she couldn't lose to Fred. 2 years later, Sharon received news of His Majesty's death. He was killed. They tried to prevent the princess from getting into the palace in order to save her life, since Fred had taken over the palace and would try to capture her. Melos, the estate of Commander Gordon's father. The commander discovered that Fred had falsified His Majesty's will and was now forcing his supporters' parties to begin movements. Sharon decided that there was no time to waste. She needed to summon the feudal lords and high aristocrats and ask them to swear an oath of allegiance. The guards division was under the princess's command because Gordon was on her side, and she had more soldiers to call upon. However, their father's body was now with them, so if a war broke out in the capital, they could lose the people's trust. At their estate, the Duke and Duchess discussed their obligation to help the crown princess win the throne. The Duchess was determined, but her husband was hesitant about whether to act now or wait until someone had won and then take his side. The woman was confident that the crown princess would not forget about them when they found themselves in a difficult situation. She gave her hesitant husband an argument why they should side with the crown princess, as it was a chance to make their son the Empress's husband. The Duke did not quite understand what his wife was talking about, and then the Duchess gave an example of how Duke Leo, who had previously supported King Caleb, now without any hesitation went over to the side of the current ruler, Emperor Ethan, and thus made his daughter a princess. The Duchess dreamed that her son Jacob, recognized as the most handsome man in Columbia, would become the Empress's husband. The Duke and Duchess arrived at the commander's estate to visit the crown princess. Sharon racked her brains trying to lure him to her side, and he came himself. But she did not understand the Duke's intentions. The Duke brought his eldest son with him to introduce him to the princess. Jacob Mitchell, eldest son of the Duke of Mitchell. Sharon didn't think he had come of his own free will, especially since she didn't usually see him, and they had never crossed paths in the imperial palace. The Duke beamed and said that the princess and his son looked like a loving couple together, especially since their hair was a beautiful black color. While Jacob wasn't the least bit embarrassed, Sharon was shocked by what she heard. The crown princess ordered merchants to be sent to spread rumors that Fred was trying to take the throne by force in her absence. Rumors spread at the speed of light, but people were confused. They did not know who was telling the truth and who was lying. 6 months later, the people's opinions on who would become the future ruler diverged, and 3 clashes occurred in the struggle between Sharon and Fred. A dispute broke out in the crown princess's military camp regarding the use of external forces. Sharon's plan was to pretend to be a weak ruler and gain support from neighboring states, and the plan was successful. The princess managed to capture Fred, who had made his way into the imperial palace. His mother fell on her knees before the princess and begged her to forgive her son, because he was the beautiful child of the late emperor and her brother. Fred, who had planned the rebellion, was sentenced to death, and his mother was imprisoned. All those who hid the emperor's corpse and those who betrayed Sharon were sentenced to death or demoted. The sage believed that the crown princess had the character of a natural ruler, and perhaps if she were to rule, much blood would be shed. However, only prosperity awaited Columbia. In the spring, the funeral of the former emperor took place, and Sharon Columbia became the 19th ruler of Columbia. Coronation Day. The princess decided to remind her nanny how 6 years ago she wanted to become the Empress of Vallejo. The nanny started crying. Sharon tried to calm her down, because everything was fine, but the nanny imagined what it would be like if the Empress saw the princess that day. The girl assured the nanny that they would definitely go to the temple to see their mother, and arrange exactly the same coronation so that she could see everything. Sharon was devastated when her father fired her nanny after she became crown princess, but it was only thanks to this that the woman remained alive. She took the woman by the hand and thanked her for always being there. Her Majesty was informed that her elder brother had arrived, and her face flushed. She rushed towards him, asking if he had really decided to see his cool little sister, but the guy remained silent in response. The brother came informally to talk and then was going to leave. Her brother John was only interested in one question. Was it necessary to sentence Fred to death? John believed that shedding blood was not at all necessary, since in the early days of a reign, one had to show one's kindness, especially since they were of the same blood. But his sister disagreed, as she believed that her brother was only speaking this way because he had no opposition. Her situation was completely different when she was the crown princess. She was compared to Fred and her other brothers and sisters. Several hundred aristocrats were against her and considered her better than others. It was better for the princess to see the blood of 1,000 enemies than the blood of 100 of her own people. John couldn't understand his sister, but now everything was resolved, and in the future she would also be able to cope with everything, unlike him. The elder brother hugged his sister with all the warmth and care. Her Majesty Sharon stood before her subjects and became Empress. That same evening, the Empress held the first meeting and determined how state affairs should be conducted and assigned people to positions. The people who supported her father, like Duke Mitchell, stayed with her, and there was no reason to fire most of them as they were in the prime of their careers. The Empress was asked when she intended to get married. Sharon didn't understand the rush. The coronation had just ended. It was necessary to lay the foundation at the beginning of the reign, so that it would be easier to conduct state affairs. Unlike previous emperors, who had a wife and many concubines with heirs, an empress could only have one husband. Her Majesty could not understand why these people thought that she could not let in the concubines. Previous emperors and their wives were rushed to produce heirs. This is why the issue of concubines was discussed so heatedly. Sharon said with a grin that she had carefully considered their words, and that the people were right, because the stability of the imperial family really did depend on good heirs. She understood that she needed to find a good husband as soon as possible, so first she took care of finding concubines. Duke Mitchell even cried out that before her, empresses had ruled and they all had only one husband. Sharon did not back down. She turned to the Duke. Didn't he say that when the Empress is alone, it is necessary to take concubines in order to balance the power? Of course, according to rumors, the empresses had lovers, but never a harem. The 5th emperor, kind and blameless, had 5 concubines. The 11th had all 6. On average, the ruler of Colombia had 15 concubines. But the Empress did not consider herself worse than them, and had at least 5 concubines. This meant that the chances of having the Empress as a daughter-in-law increased. There was a heated discussion in the crowd that the son of Duke Mitchell was a contender for the role of the groom. But if that was the case, then anyone could try. The next day, there was a discussion about changing the tax system, and prices in the city rose abnormally. And yet, prices were not comparable to what they were before the seizure of power, and the battles took place only near the capital. So it was difficult to establish a balance without affecting neighboring areas. Government affairs proved more difficult than Sharon had thought, and she was exhausted. She was brought back to her senses by the person in charge of the harem, who asked to see the Empress at that moment. He brought a document that the concubines had to sign. Her Majesty said that nothing more needed to be added. The only thing was that she wanted concubines from other countries. Sharon was pleased with the work done. It would have been even better if she had seen Ethan's face in person at that moment. The Empress asked her advisor whether Duke Mitchell would bring his son to her as a concubine. The advisor believed that he would not go so far as to say that the Duke would not be able to force his son to do something until he himself wanted it. Jacob came to his father to announce that he wished to become the Empress's concubine. The father was speechless, but when he came to his senses, he asked if Jacob knew who concubines were. He decided to tell his son that initially, this system belonged to the state of the emirate, but later, after cultural exchange, it became widespread in other countries. At that time, they were called the ruler's lovers. But unlike a full-fledged lover chosen by the Empress, concubines perform their work without regard for the feelings of the Empress. Unlike the children of a lover, the children of a concubine will be considered the children of the Empress, since the concubine lives in the harem and is included among the courtiers. The guy had no experience, but he was a quick learner and believed that mastering it wouldn't be difficult for him. Father couldn't believe that Jacob was telling the truth. For him, it was even worse than what he was worried about. The son handed the completed application to the harem to the Duke. He was confident in his abilities and believed that less than a year would pass before the Empress would marry him. Jacob demanded that his father prepare everything necessary, but the Duke did not understand what his son was talking about and what exactly he needed. The guy needed a book with night techniques. A carriage was heading to the Empress's palace. The man sincerely did not understand why he was chosen as the main ambassador. Count Maurice remained neutral until the capture. The chief ambassador came to Emperor Ethan's palace to express the Empress's desire to select concubines for her. The ambassador tried to explain that Colombia had always been kind to Vallejo, and that it was not Vallejo who had sent concubines to the emperor 2 years ago. The lady wanted to get concubines from Vallejo, as she believed that this would bring their countries closer together. The Empress delivered a message to Emperor Ethan. After reading the message, the emperor became angry. Sharon wrote that she felt bad when she thought about him and asked him to select concubines for her, since the guy knew her taste. Archie was in his chambers, lying on the sofa, thinking out loud about the absurdity of the Empress of Colombia. For the past 3 years, the prince had shown an interest in Crown Princess Sharon, and now the butler was convinced of this again. But he did not understand why the prince spoke of her with such disdain. Archie thought that being a concubine instead of a husband was disgusting, and he was also sure that the Empress sent people to ask for him to be sent away. The guy was too narcissistic and didn't understand how she could want to make the prince of a great state her concubine. The prince was going to talk to Ethan about the concubines the emperor was going to send to Colombia. His Majesty refused to send the concubines and sent the ambassadors back to Colombia. Archie burst into his brother's office to find out why he sent the ambassadors back. The prince was furious. Was his brother really going to fight with Colombia? The emperor himself had taken a concubine from there 2 or 3 years ago. The prince could not remember her name. The emperor was surprised that his brother did not remember the name of the girl who was his concubine. Ethan explained that he had no one to send there, since the prime minister's son was already married, and the emperor could not send the archduke's only son to another country. Archie began to slap his chest, hinting that he was a suitable candidate for a concubine. The emperor forbade it, but the prince pretended not to hear this and continued to rejoice, because the empress herself had sent ambassadors for him. Archie explained to his brother that Sharon knew that they had no one else but him, and that she had noticed him from the very beginning, which is why she sent the ambassadors. The boy had no doubts about himself. He was from Vallejo, and believed that he should live up to his heritage and become the Empress's husband. Ethan ignored his brother's words and asked him to leave, as he had a lot of things to do right now. As soon as Archie had disappeared from his office, the emperor grabbed his head. He was at a loss as to whether this was really how Sharon had decided to take revenge on him. The Empress, with a smile on her face, showed the commander a letter about concubines. There were even more candidates than the girl expected. Now Sharon was maintaining the image of an empress who believed in true love, but no one knew what would happen next. So for now, she decided to make do with 5 concubines. When she saw Jacob Mitchell's statement, she was surprised, as she did not expect him to express a desire. The Empress thought that his father had forced him. Sharon ordered Jacob to be left behind, 1 concubine to be sent from Vallejo to be taken, and the other 3 to be selected by the advisor himself. The Empress was informed that the ambassadors had returned from Vallejo and that the chief ambassador wished to meet with her. Count Maurice repeated Ethan's words about not being able to send the concubines and sent them back without allowing them to stay there for even a day. Sharon was furious. She grabbed a piece of paper and started writing something. In the letter, she wrote that if Ethan refused her ambassadors again, she would consider it a disdainful attitude towards Colombia. During these 3 years, the emperor did not write her a single letter, so he had no right to act as if there was something between them. After receiving the letter, Emperor Vallejo began to write back that he wrote letters to Sharon every week and even sent gifts. Putting his pen down, Ethan wondered how such a bright person as the Empress could write such a poisonous letter. Then he realized that Sharon had always been rude. She was just pretending to be nice around him. But one thing remained unclear. Who was hiding his letters and gifts then? Ethan didn't expect to melt the girl's heart with letters and gifts, but there was clearly someone who touched what was sent to the princess. The emperor did not know what to do, believing that their diplomatic relations could not be damaged because of this. He sent Archie to Columbia's palace for a while, but warned him that he would bring him back at any convenient opportunity. Ethan hoped that if Archie and Sharon had a child, the child would not be recognized as a member of the imperial family, since Archie was an unofficial concubine, which meant they could divorce at any time. Before leaving, the emperor instructed his brother that since he was going there for a short time, he should not touch Sharon. Archie asked Ethan if he was really going to divorce Sandra, because even though they were not on good terms, it was better for them to live together in order to have Duke Leo's support. Sandra married Ethan for their political goals, but still loved Caleb, whom the emperor killed. He didn't want to have a person next to him who could stab him in the back at any moment. They weren't even turning their backs on each other right now. His brother understood his situation, but he was interested in what Ethan was going to do after the divorce and whether he had anyone in mind. But the emperor ignored his question. The emperor warned his brother not to dare fall in love with Sharon or take up any position there, because he would take him away after 6 months, no matter what the circumstances. Columbia, the empress met a concubine from Vallejo who was heading towards her. She couldn't believe her eyes. For her, this guy was just a companion, but not a concubine. Archie hugged Sharon and whispered that she was probably glad that he was hers now. But the girl shouldn't relax, since he was here because he was sent, and winning his heart would not be easy. The commander was clearly unhappy with the situation, and the empress expected Ethan to send someone of high status among the aristocrats, but not his younger brother. The treasurer and the prince went to inspect the castle and the prince's chambers. Entering one of the rooms, Archie immediately expressed his dissatisfaction. The room was too small for him, but before the treasurer could answer, the guy said that he would furnish his chambers himself as he saw fit. The main thing was to show them to him as soon as possible. The prince demanded to be shown the empress's chambers, so as not to cause her trouble, he was going to go there and wait for her. The duke gave Sharon a letter from Ethan. The emperor asked to deliver it when no one was around. In the letter, he wrote that he sent her letters and gifts every week, and did not understand why she claimed otherwise. Sharon was confused, even though Ethan had cheated on her. He certainly wouldn't lie about something like that, especially since they still hadn't found who killed the previous emperor. And now someone was hiding letters addressed to the empress. The empress began to discuss with the commander that someone was hiding letters and gifts from Vallejo, but none of them could guess who it could be. The girl was convinced that even if this was not connected with the murder of the emperor, it was still worth being on guard, since the theft of imperial things was a crime. Sharon wondered if the letter, delivered by the duke personally, had reached her. If the criminal was in Vallejo, then he was involved in sending the letters, and if in Columbia, then in receiving them. The empress should have been angry at Ethan for sending his younger brother as a concubine, but these letters made her forget about it for a while. She didn't think about breaking up with Ethan because she was busy, and soon she wouldn't even think about it in her free time. And she was still going through the breakup with him. Approaching her chambers, Sharon saw Archie there. Her surprise knew no bounds. When asked what he was doing there, the guy took out a bottle of wine and said that he wanted to drink it with Her Majesty, adding at the end that she gets drunk from him, and he from alcohol. Before the girl could answer, Archie said that he wanted to wait for the empress in her chambers. But the treasurer did not allow him to enter there without her permission, which is why he was waiting for her in the corridor. Sharon invited him to her chambers. After all, he was planning to spend 6 months here, which meant they had something to discuss. The duke came running out of nowhere, almost knocking Archie off his feet. He had urgent news for the empress that required no delay. It was revealed that Prince Fred had been interfering in relations between the countries during the power struggle. Sharon was furious. She wanted to know immediately what kind of countries he was interfering in. The duke did not know this yet, but their neighbors supported them, and even Ethan sent the prince as a concubine for the empress, so it was unlikely that these were neighboring countries. Her Majesty was speechless. She was interested in the question of whether Fred used the monarch's seal. But as the duke said, the seal is always in the palace. The monarch's seal is made in the form of the ruler's signature and has the strongest influence. If Fred had used the monarch's seal and tried to interfere in the state's foreign affairs, then he had definitely forged documents and made deals, and Sharon was sure they would pay for it. The duke confirmed that the countries with which this traitor had concluded treaties might soon demand that his obligations be fulfilled. Her Majesty reflected that their friends would not make such ridiculous demands, but only their enemies would cooperate with Fred. To avoid jumping to conclusions, the Duke advised first finding out which countries he had signed agreements with and what their contents were. At the end of the dialogue, the Duke plucked up the courage to ask when his son Jacob could arrive at the palace. Sharon planned to select all 5 and invite them to the palace together, and she gave temporary residence to Prince Archie, since he was a foreigner, but the harem was not yet officially opened. Looking at his son, Duke Mitchell thought that, judging by his face, his son was no worse than Prince Archie. The father told his son the latest news regarding the arrival of the prince from Vallejo and reported the main problem that the prince was as handsome as Jacob. The boy was very interested in this prince and the fact that he had enough advantages, and decided that tomorrow he would go to the palace to personally look at him and find out what kind of person he was. Sharon reviewed the files of candidates for the harem. Among them was Brian Lord, the second son of the Chancellor of Columbia. The Chancellor had remained neutral during the power struggle and therefore remained in his position. But in terms of influence, he lagged behind Duke Mitchell. Austin Angus was the successor to the chief merchant, and most likely the guy was counting on getting a rich bride who would financially help and support him. Carl was the commander of the mercenary troops and had the nickname King of Mercenaries, which seemed strange to the Empress. The last candidate seemed a little dubious to Sharon, and she simply decided not to take him. Jacob and Archie were world-class beauties. Brian's beauty lay in his tenderness and gentleness. Austin was supposed to charm everyone with his intellect. The Empress wondered if the beauty of what remained would be revealed in its wildness. Duke Mitchell was informed that his first dream had returned, and he was overjoyed, having been so eagerly awaiting it. Jacob was clearly not in a good mood, as Archie told him that Her Majesty had been unrequitedly in love with the prince for several years. The Duke was confused. He couldn't even imagine where they could have met so that the Empress was still suffering from unrequited love. Archie also told Jacob that if he became a concubine, he would be just another flower decoration in front of him, after which the Duke was beside himself with anger. Although Jacob was upset, he told his father not to worry, as he would kick the prince out as soon as he became the Empress's husband. After meeting Jacob, Archie was furious that he would have to live under the same roof with him. The servant tried to calm the prince, saying that he had behaved very well, because a month ago he would have attacked this guy with his fists. Archie demanded to tell the treasurer what had happened, and also to be given a room on the other side of the palace from Jacob. The prince lay down and began to dream that as soon as he became the Empress's husband, he would immediately throw this impudent ferret out into the street. Columbia, feudal estate, underground post office. A subordinate of the Empress found out that 321 letters were sent to her, but 125 of them were censored. Letters sent improperly, or letters from other countries that did not bear the royal family seal, were not checked. The letters, which were not delivered to the Empress, contained insults from Prince Fred's supporters. The feudal lord could not show them to Her Majesty. Most of these letters were sent anonymously or using pseudonyms, but sometimes there were some brave souls who did not hide their names. Anonymous or not, the postal service searched for every sender. Sharon's subordinates demanded that he be provided with information about the anonymous letters and a document containing all 321 letters from the Empress. The commander's father approached him, wanting to talk to him. Feudal Lord of Columbia, Gordon's father. He was worried that the Empress would soon have concubines, and his son would have to be there all the time and watch this. But the problem was that he had been in love with Her Majesty for a long time. Gordon believed that love had many faces and thought that for Sharon, he was not a man who gave joy, but a man who gave peace. He was convinced that while the concubines would wait for the Empress day and night, he would have the opportunity to be near and protect her. This was the face of his love. The commander came into Sharon's office and had information for her about the letters. The girl decided to be the first to show that she now had candidates for concubines. The documents did not contain Prince Archie's profile, since she did not choose him, but she wanted to show him the remaining ones. The commander's eyes were dazzled by the variety, but the Empress was worried about whether he saw a bad person among them. It seemed to her that men saw such people. Without waiting for an answer, the treasurer suggested that the concubines be allowed in after 10 days, since they had already arrived and were staying nearby. Sharon happily agreed. Her Majesty wondered how Ethan was feeling now, and why he had decided to send his brother to her as a concubine. Gordon told her that the Emperor was probably furious now, and with these words he pleased Her Majesty. Sharon invited the commander to go out to dinner together when an employee burst into the office and said that Milena had been refusing to eat for several days and demanded to be called. Little Fred asked his father to go fishing together. Sharon couldn't understand why this boy called her father dad. For her, he was only her dad. Fred was the son of the emperor's concubine and demanded that the princess listen to him since he was her older brother. The empress could stand up for herself from childhood. A concubine came to the aid of her son. She accused Sharon of having a bad character, and in this she was similar to her mother. The empress came to the dungeon at the request of her father's concubine. It was difficult for her to be there, as it reminded her of the past. The woman said that since childhood the princess had been a smart but bad child. Milena, father's concubine and Fred's mother. Her Majesty interrupted the woman, saying that she was not a princess, but an empress. Milena jumped up from her seat and shouted that for her there were only two emperors, her husband and her son. Sharon remained calm and said she had become more generous. Previously, she would have been angry at the concubine for such words, but now she considered her a pathetic little person. Her Majesty asked why the woman wanted to see her. Milena still didn't know what happened to her son. Sharon didn't understand what the right thing to do was, because the woman would spend the rest of her life here anyway. She could just lie to her and feed her false hopes. The Empress reported that Fred was dead. It was she who ordered his execution. The woman couldn't believe it. Sharon said Fred tried to kill her and take what was hers. Milena began to scream that if her son had become emperor, he would never have killed his sister. The Empress reminded him that Fred, who interfered in the foreign affairs of the state, would really have left an eyesore like her. The commander stood up for Sharon, but the concubine continued to scream. She called him a traitor, because he was the emperor's knight, and in the end he helped kill his beloved son. Her Majesty asked the commander to leave the concubine. They still cannot kill her with a sword. Sharon turned around and started to leave. Milena shouted after her that she was an inhuman scum. The Empress didn't care if the woman died from her hunger strike. The concubine screamed that Sharon would be betrayed by the person she loved most, and that she had better be careful with those she trusted. The commander began to reassure the Empress that she should not take the woman's words seriously. Sharon might have considered her words a simple curse, but they had not yet caught the letter thief and the Emperor's killer. The girl offered to help Gordon sort out the book of letters. He would be very happy to work with her until the night. Her Majesty ordered increased surveillance over Milena and let them be guys in whom he has confidence. And Sharon also decided that they should go out tomorrow. The commander seemed upset because the Empress wanted to visit the future concubines, especially since, in his opinion, they knew practically nothing about the merchant Austin and the mercenary Carl. After meeting Milena, Sharon felt it would be better if they followed the concubines before she let them into the palace. After changing, Gordon and Sharon headed out for a walk through the streets of Columbia. The treasurer was furious that they could come out into the city streets at such a time. Just a month ago, the situation in the city was unstable due to the war and the struggle for the throne, but now everything was much better. The Empress wanted to begin a meeting with the successor to the chief merchant, which is why the commander needed to escort her to the Grandier Hotel. Hotel Grandier. It was the most luxurious hotel in the capital of Columbia, so expensive that even aristocrats could not afford to stay there for long. Austin booked half of the hotel and stayed there with his companions. Having seen all this with her own eyes, Sharon understood what it meant to be the successor to the country's leading merchant. Her Majesty saw a magazine whose cover stated that male concubines had appeared for the first time, and Empress Sharon announced the creation of a harem. Sharon was so captivated by this magazine that she read it without being distracted by anything. Finally, her attention was drawn to Austin, who appeared. He looked like a man who was involved in something scary, something like drugs. As he walked down the stairs, the merchant's successor pushed the man and walked on without even apologizing. The man called out to him, but when he received no reaction, he approached the boy and grabbed him by the collar. The Empress observed this scene. She was interested in the behavior of the candidate for concubine in such a situation. Austin turned around and insulted the man with a smile on his face. A fight began to break out between them, and the knights came to Austin's aid. Grabbing the stranger by the collar of his clothes, he asked him if he had pretended to be drunk on purpose in order to cause a scandal in front of everyone. The knights began to separate them, assuring the chief merchant's son that they would take care of the drunken man. Austin was sure that the stranger was pretending to be drunk on purpose, since he didn't smell of alcohol. He started to choke the man, demanding that he confess who ordered him to push him. Sharon covered her face with a magazine so that no one would notice her, especially Austin. But the guy still noticed her, and, coming up close, he said that he should probably stop if he didn't want to be arrested. The concubine told Sharon that hiding her face behind a newspaper or magazine was not particularly effective, and that next time she should hire good actors for all sorts of performances. The pretense was noticeable, although the knights pretended to intervene. Things did not go as the Empress expected. She suggested to the commander that Austin be made an official instead of a concubine. Sharon was in the tavern waiting for the mercenary, but it had been very quiet for several hours. The waiter told her that it was true that the mercenary had been here, but after the first day no one had seen him. There were still people looking for him, but no one had ever met him in the tavern. The guy didn't leave his room even to go to the toilet. His subordinates were worried that he might die there. The waiter said his bag was full of beef jerky, but he still never went to the toilet and was acting weird. Her Majesty did not understand why she should eat only dried beef while spending the night in a tavern, and even without leaving her room. The nanny asked Sharon what her first impressions of the concubines were, whether they were as they were, or whether they had been greatly embellished in the portraits. The Empress never saw one, but the portrait of the second deceived her. Austin looked like a portrait, but his aura was somehow wild. Sharon was worried about the Chancellor's son. He was too gentle a boy and also had a hard time communicating with strangers. He was very simple, and other concubines could probably crush him. A few days later, the day of the harem's opening. Although the Empress was supposed to host a grand banquet, she allowed only close friends of the concubines to attend the opening. Austin arrived first, and Sharon ordered the capture of those who followed his carriage. The Dark Knights were here too, their formation like a sword. After them, Jacob and Brian arrived at the same time. The gates of the imperial court were closed. Banquet Hall. 19th ruler of the Empire of Columbia, Her Majesty Sharon Valentine. The girl didn't know whether the concubines would have something in mind or not, but most importantly, whether they would compete with each other. She decided to observe them first. The guy looked weak, as if he had quit immediately after becoming the king of mercenaries. Prince Archie was given the documents to sign once he had read them. They all talked about love, but Sharon knew that among these concubines there was no one who truly loved her. It was okay. She wasn't going to find love. She just brought them here to have fun, watching them compete, and thereby attract the attention of the aristocrats and the people. The first condition of the contract was that they would help her strengthen imperial power, and she would give them money or glory in return. The Empress believed that at least as long as the throne belonged to her, the concubines would not betray her. The treasurer announced that the banquet would begin from that moment. The chief merchant bargained even at the banquet, and the Dark Knights were the same as Sharon had seen them a few days ago. In the evening after dinner, the Empress was getting ready for bed, and her nanny asked her if she liked the concubines and whether she had found a favorite. But the Empress was right to worry about Brian. They had been friends since childhood, and he was already quiet then, so the nanny asked her to take care of him. Sharon promised to watch over him, even though they weren't as close as they were in childhood, but otherwise the other concubines would crush him, and nothing would be left of the guy. The treasurer came to visit Her Majesty. She sincerely did not understand what he needed, but the man reminded that today was the first night. The concubines were waiting for her favor, so Sharon had to choose one of them. The girl wondered who she would spend her first night with. Firstly, there was Brian. Although she was not attracted to him as a man, he had a very docile character, and she could have raised his authority by choosing him first. Sharon was also interested in Carl because she hadn't been able to talk to him. But to show respect to Duke Mitchell, she decided to go to Jacob first. Harem. The treasurer informed Her Majesty that they had placed Prince Archie's chambers as far away from Jacob's chambers as possible. Starting from the entrance to the harem, counterclockwise are Jacob's chambers, then Austin's, Brian's, Archie's, and Carl's chambers. Sharon walked into Jacob's chambers, which confused her more than she thought. As Empress, she should have spoken first, but she didn't know where to begin. He took her hair and moved it aside, asking if she was worried, but without waiting for an answer, he said that he was worried too. Judging by his actions, Her Majesty did not notice that the concubine was worried. Jacob asked to listen to his heartbeat, and unexpectedly, the Empress leaned towards his heart. She didn't hear anything, and then the guy decided to unbutton his shirt. Having already placed her head on his chest with his hand, he asked if she could hear now. Vallejo. Ethan waited for news from his brother, but there was still none. The Emperor suggested that if Sharon was taking out all the anger that had accumulated because of him on him, but his advisor put forward another version, that maybe, on the contrary, Archie was tormenting the Empress. For a moment, Ethan wondered what if Her Majesty and his brother's relationship improved, and they became truly close. But then he pushed those thoughts aside. Having calmed himself down, he decided that they had probably just finished saying the vows, and the guys had been sent to the harem. Ethan's wife Sandra walked into his office. She came to report that she had heard that the emperor was preparing to divorce her, and wanted to hear it from him personally. He said with a smile that she already knew everything, since her spy, whom she assigned to him, had been reporting everything to her for the past 3 years. The Empress woke up in bed with Jacob. She was very ashamed, but she did not yet understand why exactly. The guy hugged her and asked if she would go swimming. Sharon jumped up from her seat and started screaming that all this was not necessary. Ethan appeared in her thoughts, and if it had been him, she certainly would not have had such a reaction. Jacob asked if the Empress would come to him again that night, but she said that she would be busy today. Her Majesty did not need heirs until she had consolidated her power. When Sharon left, the guy's servant came into his room and joyfully said that what happened that night was expected, since the other concubines could not compare to him. 2 of them were commoners. The aristocrat moved like a sloth. The only thing is, Archie had a high status, but there was no need to deal with him. Prince Archie approached Jacob and told him not to be arrogant because he had received Her Majesty's favor today, but to look in the mirror and understand that she would quickly get tired of him with such a face. The boy remained silent, and his servant was outraged that the gentleman had not answered, since he was usually eloquent. But in this case, he allowed the prince to say such unforgivable things. The concubines silently pressed the guy against the wall and began to incinerate him with a malicious look. Jacob then asked the guy what he looked like from that angle. He looked breathtakingly gorgeous. The clerk was embarrassed. His heart was beating wildly. He really was beautiful up close. Jacob was so beautiful that the boy wanted to kiss him. Austin appeared out of nowhere. He was glad to have caught such a provocative scene. He did everything to make himself noticed. He said that he did not want to distract the guys and headed away. The servant began to apologize for not explaining anything to the concubine, and that now he would spread rumors about the master. Jacob was worried about something else. It turned out that he had nothing to do with the Empress. She just fell asleep looking at him. All that night, the guy just slept and hugged Sharon. He didn't understand why this happened, because he had studied and prepared so much. But Her Majesty just wanted to sleep, and nothing more. The employee realized that the lady had cruelly crumpled and thrown away Jacob's pride on the first day. He began to reassure his master that the Empress was very tired because she was often busy with state affairs, and whoever was with her, she would still fall asleep. The most important thing here was that she came to him first. The treasurer reminded Sharon that she was to send a gift to the concubine she chose first, as it was a tradition. Her Majesty thought that they had spent their first night together, but it was not quite their first night, and if she told the whole truth, only Jacob would suffer. She ordered the gift to be sent. At that moment, Sharon felt that the treasurer liked Jacob the most. Entering the library, the Empress noticed Brian there, who was reading books alone. The girl asked him not to run away like before. The guy blushed and covered his face with a book, which greatly amused Her Majesty. Brian's character hasn't changed. Sharon has considered him cute since childhood. Taking him by the hand, she said that if someone bullied him and he wanted to cry, he should come to her and not suffer alone. Brian didn't quite understand what Her Majesty was talking about. He asked Sharon why she was telling him this. Her Majesty wondered if he still liked her. But even if he didn't, when he looked at her with such a sad look, it was hard to lie. She decided to joke about it and said that sitting in a room all day was bad for your health, inviting him for a walk. Sharon's palace was big, very big. Austin's servant asked him why he was so calm and carefree, and why he was even making fun of the other concubines. The guy was having fun. He thought that he was there to have fun, not to die of boredom. The servant asked Austin to be more serious, as they were here to seek the favor of Her Majesty. The concubine agreed that every opportunity should be taken, but the Empress had not yet come to him, so there was time to have some fun. Austin saw Sharon in the distance, and he and the servants began to watch them so as not to be noticed. The man was surprised because next to Her Majesty was the Chancellor's son, who had not even raised his eyes at the banquet yesterday. So it seemed that he was the most pale of the concubines. It seemed like the guy was one of those naive little dogs, but it turned out he was a cheeky cat. Austin came out and began to watch them openly. The employee watched the gentleman's reaction. When he saw him like this, he was afraid for his competitors. The concubine agreed. It was necessary to attract the Empress's attention. He was calm because he thought Brian was the quietest cat of them all. But it turned out that's exactly the kind of cat Sharon liked. Austin decided to dress up first, and then learn more about the Empress's past to find out about her tastes. The concubine wanted to find out whether Sharon had a first love, and if so, to find that person and find out what kind of guys she liked. The employee supported his idea, calling the gentleman prudent and the best. They went to think through the plan carefully. In his room, Archie looked at himself in the mirror. He was sure that the Empress would come to him tonight. The guy believed that on the first night Sharon went to this lizard for political reasons, but she loves him. At this moment, the prince was informed that the Empress had not entered the harem at all today. The girl worked in her office all night, deciding that she only had 3 hours of sleep left, and it was better to go to bed right now. These 3 hours flew by unnoticed. The nanny came to wake her up. While Sharon was getting ready, the maid entered the room and announced that Mr. Jacob had come to visit her. The guy received a gift from her and came to find out why she sent him. Her Majesty was surprised. Didn't the butler tell him why she sent the gift? Jacob knew the rules, but that night she didn't choose him, and the gift then has no meaning. He felt he didn't deserve it and was going to get it back. Sharon said there was no need to return anything, because no matter how the night went, he was still her man. She just sent a gift to her man, and he is not the one she was with on the first night, but the one she slept with holding hands. Jacob accepted her words and decided that then he too would give gifts to the Empress and she would not be able to return them. The commander entered the room with a smile on his face. Sharon said that it was necessary to share one's joy for it to multiply, so she was waiting for him to tell her story. Gordon didn't want to tell what was very dear to him. The Empress called him a scoundrel and changed the subject, asking what was going on with the letters and when the commander would finish. She thought, despite the fact that Gordon was already busy, he was single-handedly investigating a case for which a bunch of people were usually hired, and so she decided to offer her help. The commander flattered her by saying that her smile would be enough. Sharon still insisted on help, so Gordon gave her the task of excluding secret and overly personal letters and adding to the rest who they were written from and for what purpose. Seeing the volume of work, Her Majesty sighed heavily. There were 300 letters, but that was nothing compared to what the commander was doing. Opening her drawer to check if there was anything left, she found Carl's questionnaire. Sharon didn't understand why there hadn't been any rumors circulating yet, like how the mercenary king was so handsome that everyone turned their heads when they passed by. During the vow ceremony, Her Majesty looked at him for a second and was already speechless. She was thinking about visiting him. Walking near the lake, the Empress remembered how she had fooled around here with Ethan before, and the butler had scolded them very harshly. Sharon was dejected as it turned out that this whole relationship had no meaning. Her Majesty entered Charles's room and felt the warmth, as he intended to greet her, since he had warmed up the room. The portrait of the King of Mercenaries did not convey even a little bit of his beauty. The concubine leaned towards the mistress's ear and said that he had been waiting for her. Waiting very much. Sharon didn't know what to answer him and decided to just say hello. The guy looked questioningly at the Empress. His breath was very cold. She asked him if 2 days of waiting was really that long, but Carl replied that he had waited for her not 2 days, but much longer. The concubine leaned even closer and kissed the Empress on the collarbone. She was struck by his assertiveness. She pushed him away from her and demanded that he take his time. This guy looked like a wild wolf. It was as if nothing could stop him. He even bit her finger. Sharon was furious about this, but this did not frighten the king. He licked her fingers. Grabbing Her Majesty by the waist, Carl pushed her onto the bed. Sharon demanded that he get off her. When he got down, she drew a line between them and asked him not to break it, as she remembered that the line was drawn straight. Carl was confused. He hoped that they would not just sleep, but Sharon insisted otherwise. Sleep, and that was it. The next morning, the concubine reported that he did not dare touch Her Majesty. Sharon got dressed and was about to leave, but the guy stopped her and started tying her coat so that it wouldn't fall off. The Empress noticed his long fingers, and Carl said that whatever he did with them, he did well. She remembered that the concubine had said that he had been waiting for her for a very long time, so she decided to ask how long he had known her. Carl said he knew her before she was born, and Sharon turned and walked away. She walked and thought how strange the guy was, how strange he was behaving, and how he wasn't answering her questions properly. But Carl was much hotter than Her Majesty thought. Prince Archie ran after Sharon and asked her to stop. He was angry, shouting that she was playing with his feelings, and if Sharon wanted to make him jealous, then she succeeded. The Empress froze. The prince was, of course, a smug fool, but so handsome. The guy was a real mystery to her. She would really like to look into his head at least once. Her Majesty ordered the treasurer to send gifts to Prince Archie and Charles. Otherwise, the prince will be very offended. Sharon also asked to find out more about Carl's past. The treasurer promised to carefully check all the information and report it to her. The Empress was taking a bath when an employee ran in and reported that someone had left a mark on the palace of the deceased. The Palace of the Dead appears to be a simple village with cute houses, but under each building there is a burial place for an imperial couple. Some impudent person desecrated the tomb of the late emperor. It happened at 6 in the morning, when the guards were changing shifts and no one appeared here for 7 minutes. None of the guards saw anything suspicious. Sharon was furious that this happened in less than 10 minutes, and no one noticed. She ordered the commander to find out whether the guards were involved in the incident. It was necessary to find the person who did this. It was a slap in the face to the imperial family and disrespect for the former emperor. The Empress asked the senior guard if he thought this had anything to do with the attack and murder of the previous emperor. The symbol was painted in black paint. The senior guard had seen it somewhere, but couldn't remember. It was the mark of one of the assassins' guilds, the mark of the Black Forest. This guild was known for leaving their mark after every completed task. Most likely they killed the emperor, Sharon thought, although it was strange that they left a mark after so long. The Empress came to the conclusion that anyone could have left it by repeating the design, since it was not complicated. The commander thought so too, and Her Majesty asked him if anyone had ever forged the mark. This mark is used to show pride in the crime committed. The guild was very proud of themselves, and they did not like someone trying to take their name for themselves. So they warn that they will find the copycat and kill him, and then leave a mark on the corpse upside down. Snapping their fingers, Sharon told the guard that this is how they will catch the killer. He didn't understand what exactly Her Majesty meant. Her plan was that they would secretly track them down and publicize the matter abroad. The commander and the senior guard stood in bewilderment. If it wasn't the Dark Forest that did this, then there will be a corpse somewhere with their mark inverted. They will want to say that it was not they who did it, and that they will find the criminal themselves. After these words, the guard understood the Empress's plan. So, just in case, Sharon ordered increased security at the palace. If her father was killed by professional killers, then someone must have ordered this murder. Her Majesty's face sank, as the assassins could not be broken by any torture. And it would be difficult if the Dark Forest really did it. Sharon remembered that she had an anonymous letter. The palace of the deceased is not located inside the imperial court, but is still located on its territory. The Empress did not understand how it was possible to reach it unnoticed in 7 minutes, leave a mark, and then disappear. Sharon opened the letter. Her face showed surprise, turning into laughter, and she handed the letter to the commander. The letter stated that the Empress herself killed her father. Gordon said he wanted to see this madman's head chopped off because there was too much garbage in his head. Sharon laughed, really liking the way he was thinking. She ordered the commander to conduct an investigation and find out if the letter was somehow connected to the mark left behind. The training ground of the imperial family. Sharon and Gordon decided to have a sword fight to distract the Empress from what had happened and state affairs. For the first time in a long time, Her Majesty perked up. And, thanks again to the commander, it seemed the time had come to thank him. Gordon noticed that she wanted to say something, but fell silent. He asked if Sharon wanted to tell him something good, but the girl pretended not to understand what the commander was talking about. Austin noticed the Empress walking with Gordon and bursting into laughter. The concubine wondered if his plan of seduction had not failed precisely because of the commander. The employee did not understand what was being discussed. Austin explained that Gordon was a friend of the Empress's older brother, and the former emperor treated him very well. This makes him a close friend to Sharon, and he is also an excellent swordsman. The servant realized that his master was jealous, but this was surprising, because this feeling was unusual for him. Brian's advisor asked him if the Empress didn't treat him the best, so he didn't understand why his master felt so depressed every day. Sharon was nice to Brian, but they had only seen each other once in the library, so Brian wasn't sure. The Empress gathered all the concubines to report that someone had thrown a stone at Brian, and that it had happened in the harem. The treasurer reported that the master's lackey and bodyguards said that he wanted to catch him, but was afraid that during this time his accomplices might attack the master, so he was unable to move. Sharon had no intention of telling them to live in peace, as she knew it was impossible, but she did demand that the concubines do so without bloodshed. She warned that if this happened again, and they couldn't find the culprit, then perhaps everyone would be punished. Austin began to discuss with his bodyguard that the rumors about the Empress always following the knights in her childhood were true, and that she might even pull out a sword in the future if they quarreled. The servant had not yet learned who the Empress's first love was. There was no precise information yet, but the enemy was definitely strong. After asking if her first love was the ruler of any country and receiving a positive answer, Austin immediately realized that she was talking about Ethan. Judging by the concubines, Sharon did not like the big age difference, and her face had to be beautiful. Austin suggested that if the Emperor were unmarried, they would have been together for a long time, and since she opened a harem instead, their opponent was now busy with another lady. Now the question was to find out what Ethan's character was like. Previously, when the heir to the chief merchant went to Vallejo on business, the Emperor was attractive and had a pleasant voice, and he did not seem like a harsh person. Noticing Prince Archie passing by, Austin decided to find out everything himself. He decided to curry favor with the prince, starting with the fact that they hadn't really talked to each other. And now this was his chance. The prince didn't understand what they wanted from him and what they could talk about. Austin asked him directly why he became the Empress's concubine, since he could easily have become her husband, but became only a concubine. The guy didn't lose his composure and replied that Her Majesty had been unrequitedly in love with him before she became Empress, and when she couldn't get him just like that, she came up with a cunning plan. The heir to the chief merchant realized that the prince clearly did not know about Her Majesty's relationship with his brother, and then Austin decided to change the subject to his older brother, but Archie didn't understand what his brother had to do with it. He asked to tell about his character, since their guild makes deals with many countries, and recently they directed their forces towards Vallejo. Archie immediately began to tell that Ethan was very selfish. If he wanted something or needed something, he would never let it go, and he was also a heavy smoker. Emperor Vallejo was in his office and thought that today he had not received a letter from his brother. Every day Ethan missed Sharon more and more. He remembered how they looked at the sky together, played staring games, and how he kissed her for the first time at that moment. His thoughts were interrupted by the chief secretary, who came to report that the results of the investigation that the Emperor had requested had arrived. Mail addressed to Sharon disappeared, most of it mailed quietly, half of it confiscated back in Vallejo. It was assumed that the one who stole the letters and gifts was Duke Leo. Even if he did not do it, then the Duke was definitely the one who ordered the theft and hiding of the Empress's things. This fact was confirmed by the people who lost their gifts. Duke Leo had been keeping an eye on Ethan from time to time since he became the ruler and became much more influential. But he still had not recognized his daughter as Empress. The Duke waited until Sandra gave birth to heirs in order to kill the Emperor immediately afterward. Sandra became Ethan's wife for only one reason. She was Duke Leo's daughter. The Emperor decided to expose everyone at once, but first he had to collect everything. He began writing a letter to Sharon, saying that he had received a report and that some of the letters and gifts he had sent had been lost in Vallejo and some in Colombia, and in the end he warned the Empress that she too should prepare herself. Ethan ordered the chief secretary to deliver this letter personally into the hands of a person he could trust. In the morning, the Empress woke up in bed with Brian. While the guy was sleeping, she got ready, stroked his head, and headed out of the room. Prince Archie was waiting near her chambers. The girl was surprised by such guests in the morning. It turned out that he was waiting for her, because she never visited him. Sharon laughed. The concubine was not at all like his brother. The Empress invited him to have breakfast together. At breakfast, Her Majesty asked the prince if he knew who might have thrown a stone at Brian. The concubine said that he was not interested in other people's affairs. Sharon laughed again. The guy, although a fool, was interesting. Her Majesty warned that next time he too could become a victim. Isn't he afraid? Archie stated that he is not a wimp, and if he is attacked, he will defend himself. The prince asked Her Majesty about the results of the investigation regarding the black mark left on the Emperor's tomb. Archie expressed his suspicions that the Black Forest might be the Emperor's killers. When Sharon asked why he thought so, the prince said that in the past, his brother had wanted to order a murder from them, but he had been refused. Her Majesty was interested in this story and especially in the fact that Ethan wanted to kill someone. Dark Forest said that they did not want to be associated with the Imperial family in any way. After Archie's words, Sharon thought that the criminals were definitely not a Dark Forest. But then why did the real criminal want to shift the blame onto them? After receiving unexpected information from Archie, the Empress thought it would be a good idea to ask those who might also have good knowledge of the external circumstances. 10 minutes ago, Sharon called Austin and Carl to her, asking them if they heard about what happened in the palace of the deceased. They both knew what was happening. Since one was a famous mercenary king, and the other a merchant, Her Majesty was sure that they were somehow connected to these groups, for good or bad. Carl was once hired to protect a man who was their target. The king of mercenaries only completed half of the task. He found it difficult to tell the details, but half survived, and half did not. Austin said that the Dark Forest is known for the fact that if one of their people is killed, 100 of them will come out to take revenge. Sharon was interested in his words, because apparently the concubine knew them well. She asked if he had any connections. Austin smiled mysteriously and replied that the Dark Forest was an enterprise that he managed. The Empress angrily drew her sword, pointing it at the merchant and angrily asking him since when did merchants become murderers, or whether her suspicions from their first meeting had been correct and he was a drug dealer. The concubine, with a smile on his face, began to explain that this enterprise had collaborated with the former emperor, the one before last, and the one before that. Sharon didn't understand what that meant, but it meant they weren't the ones who committed the murder. Usually, when someone abdicates the throne or writes a will, the chief of the Dark Forest is called to meet with the person who will receive the throne, and it is kept secret. For example, if you know exactly who the criminal is, but he got one step ahead of you and destroyed all the evidence, then the court will be useless. The Empress still didn't understand why the company was then called hired killers, but Austin explained that they were distracting society from their activities. They leave a mark after a murder on purpose, so that people become fixated on it. To prove that the guy was telling the truth, he asked Sharon to show her documents bearing the seals of previous rulers. The ruler's seal is created by infusing it with sacred power, so that it cannot be counterfeited. Her Majesty was concerned about why Austin had not simply approached her during the coronation, but had approached her in this way. It turned out that they found it difficult to believe her, since the Empress was one of the suspects in the murder. Sharon wanted to know why she was suspected, so she asked Carl to leave the office and invited the commander. When Gordon entered the office, the Empress gave the go-ahead to report now. Austin was embarrassed, but the girl said that the commander was the person she trusted most of all. The concubine said that they suspected her of murdering the emperor, since the latter had ordered an investigation into his daughter. Her Majesty was amazed. She was eager to know what he wanted to know and why he asked to do it. The former emperor did not tell the group about the purpose of the investigation, but he probably wanted to find out everything before she became Empress. After this, the former emperor was killed, and, naturally, they began to suspect Sharon. But then why did Austin become a concubine? There were many ways, even if we exclude the coronation. Her Majesty assumed that it was an order from the chief merchant, but the boy denied it, since his father knew nothing about his relationship with the Dark Forest. Austin's family had connections with the Dark Forest, but the status of head was transferred to him by another relative, although they swore allegiance. But the enterprise was not subordinate to the emperor, but had close cooperation. Sharon couldn't believe that her father had ordered an investigation into her. This conversation shocked her. However, she believed that the son of a merchant, who was connected to the entire state like a spider's web, would not lie. Her Majesty demanded that Austin take an oath of allegiance to her. The boy smiled, stood up, and left the office. Sharon laughed. Wasn't that amazing? But the commander didn't understand what she meant. They were talking about concubines. They came in here together, and their characters were visible from their gate. It's so interesting. Having summoned Austin to her office again, the Empress demanded proof that the Dark Forest had not killed her father, since she could not believe everything the concubine said. Sharon said she suspected everyone, not just them, absolutely everyone. She handed Austin a letter, which stated that it was she who had killed her father. The Empress was suspected of murder not only by the Dark Forest, but by someone else as well. After looking at the letter, the concubine said that it was not from their group. Someone clearly wanted to pin the murder of the emperor, the mark on the tomb, and the accusation of the Empress's murder on them. Austin didn't know who to suspect, as there were many enemies. Sharon was torn apart. Not only was she busy strengthening the state border, but she also fell into this trap. The concubine reminded that he was not the Empress's subordinate, but rather one of her men. As he left, Austin asked to be treated like a man. Sharon decided to take a break and went for a walk with the commander, asking him a question he didn't expect. She asked why he was still not married. The guy froze, but after a few seconds he still answered that his first love was unsuccessful. Her Majesty wondered when Gordon had his first love, since he spends all his free time with her. It turned out that his first love was already married. But many aristocrats did not pay attention to this. But the commander was not like that. Sharon wished him to meet someone better. The guy sighed sadly and replied that there was no one better than her. Time passed and the investigation slowed down. A dark forest, a mark on a tomb, an anonymous letter. These strange events and state affairs were so exhausting that the Empress became accustomed to falling helplessly into bed at nightfall. Fortunately, the courtiers became calmer, and the atmosphere in the palace too. The treasurer came to inform Her Majesty of the news that the deputy commander of Emperor Ethan's knights had arrived, and the emperor had ordered his younger brother to be guarded because he was concerned about his well-being. Sharon laughed that he had sent the knight so far for this, and it was still unknown how long he might stay here. The Empress asked the treasurer if he thought Emperor Ethan had sent a knight to spy on them. The treasurer didn't like Ethan very much, but even he couldn't call the guy a spy. Hearing a noise in the corridor, Sharon and the commander went out to check what was going on. Archie and Brian's footmen were locked in a fight, with Brian himself sitting nearby. When asked what had happened, the Lord clarified the situation by saying that it seemed the footmen had gotten angry and said something that His Majesty Archie could not ignore. Travis, the knight from Vallejo, appeared out of nowhere and explained that the footmen had come to the prince to sort things out. Supposedly, someone on the second floor had poured water on Brian. The footman said that with Archie's personality, Sharon would soon leave him and that he was so violent because he was from Vallejo. And he also insulted him in every possible way, saying that people had a reason to think he was stupid. Sharon thought that once the concubines got to know each other properly, she would be able to let them sort things out on their own during quarrels. But the guys did not engage in a secret fight, but openly waved their fists. The concubines were given a choice. Either they let them go and leave everything as it was, or they punish Archie for beating Brian's footman, and the footman for insulting the prince. Brian said they wanted to leave things as they were, and although Archie wasn't happy, he supported him. Gordon suggested that the two of them be assigned knights to be around and keep an eye on them. Sharon thought it was a good idea, but it wasn't necessary. Her Majesty was on her way to see Archie to talk to him when she was stopped and informed that the killer of the previous emperor had been apprehended. Archie walked into his room and fell face down into the pillow. Travis asked if the prince was okay. The prince quipped that a man who had just arrived could not know anything, but the knight was experienced and could understand everything just by looking into his eyes. If the Empress had been in love with Archie, she would have taken his side, Travis said. The prince was outraged by such impudence. He believed that deep down Sharon loved him. She just didn't know how to express her feelings. The knight did not recognize the prince. Usually he was always full of confidence, but clearly not now. He decided to cheer him up by saying that His Majesty looked respectable, and Emperor Ethan would definitely be proud of him. Archie waved his hand and changed the subject. He was interested in why Travis had come. The knight was surprised that the prince didn't know and explained why he was there. The concubine laughed. His brother sent him to guard someone weaker than himself. Archie still didn't believe that his brother had sent the knight to guard him, not to keep an eye on him, but Travis was adamant. The prince thought, even if Ethan was worried about him, he would hardly send a man with excellent espionage skills just for protection. Underground dungeon. The interrogation was not carried out, in which case the Empress did not understand how they found out that this particular man was her father's killer. The guards began to exchange glances with each other, and one of them reported that the man had confessed himself. Sharon went down to the second basement floor, and in front of her sat the man who allegedly killed her father. When the Empress asked if he had killed her father, the man began to shout that he had done it. The stranger's body seemed strong, but Her Majesty did not think that he had done it. Neither his appearance nor his character suggested that he was a murderer. Sharon wondered if the real killer had blackmailed the man into confessing, but that raised the question of what someone would need to be so afraid of to confess to killing the emperor. The Empress asked how he killed the emperor. The man replied that he did it with a dagger, which he pierced straight into the heart. Since it was not reported how Sharon's father was killed, many assumed that he was simply poisoned. And judging by the fact that the man knows all the details, then he has at least some connection to the murder. After the invasion, the knights found no evidence, and His Majesty was not interested in how the stranger managed to do this unnoticed, without losing his composure. He replied that he simply crossed the fence and then hid from people's eyes in the shadows. The alleged killer even knew how many people were in the palace, giving precise figures that there were 52 guards and 3 shifts at the main gate. Sharon asked how many people were inside when he sneaked into the bedroom. The man replied that there was no one there and that it was not a bedroom, but an office. And that was also the correct answer. The Empress said that the ruler's killers are tortured to such an extent that they beg to be killed. And even after death, they are not left alone. In the best case, their families become slaves and serve far from wealthy families. They could even find a relative whom the man does not know or punish friends or a loved one. The stranger was moved to talk by this information, and he shouted out that it was not he who killed the emperor. But the question of why he confessed to this remained unanswered. Sharon ordered the commander to tie the man's hands loosely and give him a chance to escape. The Empress was sure that he was not a real criminal, but he was certainly familiar with a real one, and it seemed to her that the stranger almost took the bait. After some time, Gordon reported that the criminal had escaped from prison. Her Majesty broke into a smile. She knew this would happen. Her plan worked. Since the man ran away as soon as he was given the chance, it means he didn't confess because he wanted to die. And he's definitely not a real killer, Sharon thought. Her Majesty ordered that the stranger be pursued for now, and that he be caught only when he left the capital. The treasurer, who had worked for the Empress and her father for a long time, said that the late emperor always described his daughter in only one phrase, and it turned out to be true. The late emperor said that when Sharon wants something, she tries to get it by any means necessary, and he always said this with a look of pride for his daughter. That night, Her Majesty, in her sleep, felt the delicate and sweet aroma of perfume, which she would like to smell always. She suddenly came to her senses and woke up, not understanding where she smelled the aroma from, because she was sleeping alone today, without a concubine. The window, she left it open, looking down. Her Majesty thought that no one could have climbed up here, but what was it then? Was it really a dream? The Empress was informed that the criminal had been arrested again, and she, along with the guards and the commander, headed to the dungeon. Sharon asked the stranger why he confessed, instead of the real killer. The man was clearly surprised that she understood everything. Her Majesty explained that, firstly, he confessed himself, but as soon as the chance to escape arose, the man immediately took advantage of it. Secondly, he did not have the necessary skills to escape. And thirdly, the stranger was terrible at martial arts, unlike a real killer. The Emperor's real killer remained silent, and then the Empress offered to help him if he was being blackmailed. But he still didn't make a sound. Just as the man was about to say something, there was a crash and the room was covered in blood, and the stranger was dead. The commander covered Her Majesty with his body, but she was still covered in blood, like everything around her. She ordered that the priest be called and that the bodies not be touched until he appeared, just in case. The nannies froze in horror when they saw the appearance of Sharon and Gordon. They immediately prepared a bath. The commander told her to rest, and he would go for now. Sharon stopped him and told him to take a bath first. Her Majesty insisted that he go first, even though the commander refused, and she handed him a towel. Before his death, the man managed to tell them to worship the Lord and seemed to mention Fred's name. Sharon couldn't get these words out of her head. For a moment she thought that he was the killer and still alive. But this could not be, since his throat was cut. Fred managed to irritate the Empress even when he was dead. Gordon finished his bath and came out naked, which angered Sharon. The guy didn't have a change of clothes with him, which she didn't even think about because of the rush. The girl laughed. She found it very funny that the commander was standing in her room completely naked, covering himself only with a towel. The next morning in the underground dungeon, Amelia, priestess. The priestess concluded that the heat was indeed cursed. Sharon thought curses had been banned long ago, and sorcerers had been destroyed 500 years ago. Now everything had become even more confusing. Amelia said that the best way to get rid of a cursed body is to burn it. But a body with a strong curse can transfer bad energy to the ground, or anything nearby as it decomposes. In this case, people who fall under the influence of this energy become weak and become infected with an unknown disease. In the worst case, the dead can be resurrected and become zombies. Although zombies had existed for generations, and were now only briefly mentioned in history books, Sharon was concerned about whether their generation would be able to cope with them if something happened. The treasurer and the commander were worried that the body had not yet been burned. But the Empress decided to paint a portrait of this man, since he was connected with the Emperor's killer, and someone might recognize him. The priestess was a little confused, since exorcists had almost disappeared from the temples. It would be difficult to find someone who understood all this. Her Majesty ordered that everyone who could quickly and accurately draw a portrait be gathered, and that as much ice as possible be brought to prevent the body from decomposing, as well as everyone who uses black magic. Amelia knew someone named Karen who might know something about this. Karen now lives in the Costa area. The treasurer whispered in the Empress's ear that the investigation she had ordered to begin was over, but the girl had no memory of any investigation. The man spoke about investigating Carl's past. Apparently, there have never been any rumors about the mercenary king being in a relationship, but no one could know for sure whether Carl was meeting with someone secretly or not. Moreover, since the guy is constantly on the road due to his activities, there are many ridiculous rumors about him. It is difficult to understand what is true and what is false. The treasurer hinted that Sharon should visit the harem a little more often, since she was so looking forward to its opening. If Her Majesty does not pay special attention to the concubines and pamper them, then the aristocrats may again raise the issue of marriage. Brian's lackey was more worried about his future than the concubine himself. The boy was a noble, handsome man. But all the men here were gorgeous, handsome men. It was necessary to somehow skillfully embellish his innate beauty, so that it would attract attention. The footman pinned a brooch on the lord. Brian was perplexed as to the purpose of all this, but the man insisted that he go with her, since he could meet the Empress at any moment. The servant was about to go to the city to buy cosmetics for the concubine. He asked him not to go anywhere except the library, so as not to get into trouble. Sharon entered the harem and was met by Carl and Jacob playing chess. The guys looked quite harmonious together. Carl was surprised why the lady came to him. Her Majesty laughed and said that she just wanted to visit him and see how he was doing. Jacob was offended that the Empress did not even ask how he was doing, because she did not expect to see them together, planning to visit the concubines in turn, and the first in line was Carl. Sharon decided to avoid the conversation and said that she had urgent business and had to go. The guys stood there in bewilderment, as she had just arrived and was already about to leave. Near the entrance to the harem, Gordon was waiting for Her Majesty. She hurried away, saying that she had come to the harem at lunchtime and that she had nothing to do here at such a time. The commander smiled mysteriously. Everyone was following the Empress's orders. The artists were currently working on the portrait. The investigators had gone to catch the remaining sorcerers, and Amelia had gone to Costa. The case of the Emperor's murder turned out to be difficult. Who could have thought that it would all come down to sorcerers and curses? The treasurer was surprised that Sharon had already returned, although she had left for Mr. Carl half an hour ago. But the Empress could not admit that she had said only 2 words and left. The man said that if she didn't like these concubines, they could take 3 more. The treasurer was interrupted by the commander, who said that he thought the fake killer had mentioned Fred's name before he died, and shouldn't they investigate that? Sharon agreed with him, especially since it was worth checking the version that someone not connected with Fred might want to harm Her Majesty. Gordon took the initiative to conduct an investigation, but the Empress forbade him to interfere. The commander insisted that it was a serious matter, and he could not delegate it to anyone else. But Sharon was adamant. Her Majesty believed that Gordon still slept little. She could not give him more work. The guy led the knights, did business as a follower of Columbia, and at the same time he was conducting a secret investigation related to the letters. Sharon wanted Austin to take on this investigation. The Empress decided to test whether she could trust him in this way. Inviting him into her room, she started from afar. The concubine immediately realized that she was not going to show him mercy. She gave him a folder with documents. The guy examined it and said that there was practically nothing in it. But that was his task, to fill it out. Austin was surprised that Sharon had called him not as a concubine, but as the chief of the Dark Forest. The Empress asked if he knew that the Emperor's killer had confessed and then died. The concubine nodded. He knew. She asked him to find out whether Fred's supporters really had anything to do with the Emperor's death, or whether they were simply mocking his death. Austin smiled slyly and asked if Her Majesty knew how to train a dog, that the owner is sometimes strict with it, but when it obeys, it receives food as a reward, not forgetting to praise it. The concubine was interested in what reward he would receive for the completed task. Sharon didn't even think about a reward, but Austin took care of that and asked for a hug if he succeeded. The Dark Forest chief already knew the Empress well even when he didn't interact with her much, thanks to rumors and objective information. but now he wanted to know the real her. While walking through the garden, Austin saw Brian holding a bird in his hands to help it fly. The chief merchant's son thought about the lord. He was the chancellor's son, known for his good character and strong shyness. Although everyone in the world considered him a good-natured fool, Austin couldn't tell if the guy was really that good or if he was just a good actor. His expression made him doubt it. But either way, he decided it wasn't his business. Aristocrats from small states, when they take up a new position, organize lavish banquets and invite their friends and aristocrats who are nearby. On the surface, it seems like it's just a celebration, but in reality, the banquet is held to declare that he is now the master here. When a person becomes the ruler of a state, he is obliged to hold a banquet in honor of this event. The treasurer told the Empress that she too should hold a banquet in honor of the coronation and invite distinguished guests from other states, thereby strengthening her authority. There was one problem. Usually, a banquet was organized by a couple of rulers. Organizing a banquet for one was quite problematic, since Sharon was busy with work and couldn't even cope with the harem. If you're planning a banquet, you need to prepare everything down to the smallest detail. This isn't an ordinary hassle, especially since celebrating a coronation is the first time the ruler invites foreign guests and is being judged by them. Sharon wondered who she could rely on. Her mother was now serving in the temple, so she couldn't ask her. She wasn't on such a good relationship with her stepbrothers to trust her with such an event. And then she came up with the idea of asking one of the concubines to take care of this event. If tradition dictates that the banquet be hosted by her husband, it will likely be highly regarded, no matter who the Empress chooses. Looking at the commander, Sharon thought, he was calm, wise, and reliable. It would be good to have at least one concubine like him. The treasurer proposed to choose Jacob. Her Majesty knew that he would vote for this candidate, but she decided to ask the concubines themselves and headed to the harem. In the harem, everyone was actively looking for something, and the instigator of the rising noise was none other than Prince Archie. Sharon sometimes felt like Ethan had sent him to get on her nerves. Sharon asked what it was this time and why the prince was making a fuss again. Archie lost his amulet, which he brought with him from Vallejo, a very expensive item, since it was made by the high priest himself. The prince suspected Jacob of what had happened, but in his defense, the boy said that he saw another concubine leaving Archie's room. All three sat in the office and waited for the arrival of the one whom Jacob had named. Carl entered the room. Sharon immediately asked him if he had stolen Archie's amulet, but the guy denied everything, saying that he had not gone into his room. Carl advised Jacob to use his eyes correctly and not to talk nonsense to the Empress. Sharon was surprised, because not long ago the guys were friends and played chess. She asked them if anyone had evidence, but both concubines replied that they had no evidence. Her Majesty ordered the knights to search every room in the harem and find the amulet. Archie took Sharon's hand and whispered that he really liked that she took his side. Although it was not entirely true, she decided not to upset the guy. Jacob stopped Carl and asked why he lied, since he was leaving the prince's room, but he heard nothing in response. After hearing nothing in response, Jacob grabbed the mercenary king by the hand, but the latter dodged it in response, grabbing the concubine by the face and saying that for a partner for a night out, it was enough to be handsome and smile, so he should close his mouth and eyes, since he did not need it. Carl was clearly not himself. Through clenched teeth, he said that he was already enduring it and trying his best not to kill the concubines. Jacob decided to ask his father to investigate the mercenary king. The whole situation seemed murky to him. Sharon was under pressure. Time was passing, and she still hadn't chosen a companion for herself. The girl herself was unhappy, since every time she went to the harem, some kind of showdown occurred there. The Empress summoned Austin and Brian to her, deciding to inform them that it had been decided to hold a banquet in honor of the coronation, and she wanted them to lead it. Sharon believed that Austin was used to a luxurious life, and Brian was used to an aristocratic life, and they would get a good result if the guys acted together, so she hoped for them. Her Majesty thought that of the two, they were the ones who quarreled the least with the others, so everything should go well. The concubines sat down to discuss the banquet. Austin insisted that it was necessary to arrange a luxurious reception, but Brian had a different opinion, since he believed that the Emperor's killer had not yet been caught, and everything should be done modestly. The chief of the Dark Forest thought that 2 or 3 words would be enough to persuade the lord, but the boy turned out to be quite stubborn. 5 days later, the decorations looked luxurious but modest, as they were all black. 2. The secretary responsible for organizing the banquet exhaled. With these guys, even choosing a few sheets of paper was difficult. 3. On the first day, they argued and interrupted each other without any embarrassment, so they did not decide anything, and then they quarreled despite Laura's presence, so much so that Mr. Austen had to calm the lord down. 4. The Empress was informed that a priest from Costa had arrived, but the priestess remained there to replace him in affairs. 5. Sharon asked to tell the priest everything he knew about the current situation and the outcome. In case the man was being disingenuous, she would understand everything. 6. The priest answered rather sharply, but as it was, he asked Her Majesty if she really didn't know that 1,000 years ago witches and sorcerers were executed en masse. 7. Many people relate stories about this to events that happened half a century ago. Although in fact the records speak of something that happened 1,000 years ago, such cases themselves were few in number, and most of them occurred in distant countries. 8. The priest noted that this had already happened 1,500 years ago, and perhaps sorcerers are reborn every 500 years. 9. Sharon was interested in how to get rid of them, but this could only be found out by turning to the chronicles. 10. The man knew only one person who performed exorcisms, and that was the high priest. And indeed, the very existence of the high priest is terrifying to those who dwell in darkness. 11. There was one main problem. No one knew who he was and where he lived. The priest hid his identity. 12. Fortunately for the Empress, the priest knew where the chief priest was hiding, but if someone else went instead of him, he would refuse the meeting. Sharon was so nervous she couldn't sleep a wink, so she needed to talk to someone who could cheer her up. Entering Archie's room, she saw him in clay. The guy was making himself a face mask, which greatly amused the Empress. The prince ran to the bathroom, asking her not to leave, as he would wash himself in a moment and return. Sharon was glad to be here, but she still wasn't sure that Archie hadn't come from Vallejo as a spy. Even though he seemed stupid, it was worth remembering that he was still Ethan's brother, and maybe even his image. On the prince's bed, Sharon noticed a small teddy bear with a tag that said Her Majesty on it. The prince returned from the bath, smiling widely, but did not notice anyone in the room. The Empress had run away, as she had urgent business to attend to. He was furious, not understanding what urgent business Sharon could have had in the middle of the night that she had to leave him. The servant could not say anything clear. The only thing he knew was that the commander of the knights had come for the Empress. The priest, who was heading to the main point, was killed 15 minutes after his carriage left the capital. The commander reported that there was no evidence. The coachman and the attendant were dead, and the identity of the killer had not been established. The letter the Empress wrote to the high priest has disappeared. One thing was clear. The killer didn't want Sharon to bring the high priest here. The treasurer was interested in whether the sorcerers had anything to do with the death of the late emperor. Sharon didn't know, because it was difficult to say. If they had killed the emperor, they could have kept their presence to themselves. There was no point in them revealing themselves. Her Majesty decided that it was necessary to bring the high priest here. If their enemies wanted to interfere, then they needed to move more confidently towards their goal. The next day, a notice from the Empress was posted on all the signs in the country that she was inviting the high priest to her coronation banquet, and she strongly recommended that the high priest accept the invitation. Invitations for the priest were posted all over the country, but the suspected sorcerers were still being sought. In the garden, Sharon saw Prince Archie and Brian fighting, and holding her head, she wondered if there was some kind of madness going on again, and Archie was in charge again. The girl stopped the fight and ordered Brian's footman to take him away immediately. Her Majesty was outraged that the guy was doing all this in front of everyone. He, in turn, began to justify himself by saying that the first Brian had started it all. The Empress lost her temper and started shouting at the concubine that if he couldn't use his tongue instead of his fists, he should leave. She needed concubines, not blocks. And she didn't need a fool like Archie. Sharon ordered him to quickly pack his things and return to his homeland. The prince began to pack his things, despite the servants' entreaties to stay. He decided for himself that he did not need a man who threw around such words. Archie stood his ground, packing his things, thinking that the Empress would regret her words and would think about what she said from now on, and that he would forgive her only if she sent 5 ambassadors with apologies. Travis began to persuade the prince, arguing that he was not a simple concubine. but had come here to strengthen relations between the two countries. And if he left, he would put Vallejo in an awkward position. The commander began to stand up for Archie. He believed that Her Majesty should not have said such a thing to Archie. But Sharon said that sometimes you should say something sharply, which will benefit the prince, especially since this is not the first time she has seen him hit someone. The Empress decided to visit Austin. The concubine was surprised that Sharon came to him at such a time, in the middle of the day. His room looked like it was inhabited not by a concubine, but by a mad scientist. The guy explained that the books were related to trade, since he didn't know whether he would continue to be the heir to his father's business, but he still needed to look for new information somewhere. Sharon came to see if Austin had fulfilled her request regarding Prince Fred. At the moment, he hadn't been able to find a single reason why Fred could have killed the late emperor. He wanted to quickly finish the investigation and hand over the case, but for now, it was still too early. Sharon was sure that the concubine had seen all sorts of things when he worked with the Dark Forest. Now she was worried about the question of whether he knew anything about sorcerers, but Austin only had the same information as she did, or so he wanted people to think. The Empress began to leave, but the concubine stopped her and asked about the incident with Archie. Whether she really did that to him? Sharon confirmed that it was true. After that incident, Mr. Archie cried all night in the garden, and that's how everyone found out that Her Majesty had abandoned him. Austin came to the boy's defense, believing that the prince shouldn't have hit Mr. Bryan, but he could also be understood, since the loss of the amulet and all this, so much had fallen on Archie lately. He simply lost his temper. Sharon would have understood if Bryan had said it, but it was quite unusual to hear it from Austin. The guy was not one to easily stand up for others. The servant of the merchant's heir was outraged. Now among the concubines there were 2 people with whom Her Majesty did not remain. And the guy was one of them. Austin's arrogance and mischief were his trademark, and when he started acting kind, it suggested he was up to something, the advisor said. The concubine thought the guy was a good guy, but if you piss him off, he won't shut up, which was already getting on Austin's nerves. The gentleman asked him to calm down, as he had 2 reasons for helping Prince Archie. The first was that by getting closer to the prince, he could learn more information about Emperor Ethan. And the second reason was because Bryan was not as simple as he seemed. The Dark Forest chief was convinced that the Lord was feeding his snake-like nature to create the image he desired, and that he always needed a rival to make him look better. When Bryan gets rid of the prince, he will switch to him, since he knows his true nature, therefore he should help Archie. Austin concluded. The advisor said that the gentleman was simply a genius and cool as always. But he was a fool. He was afraid that he would become a good guy. Sharon couldn't get Austin's words about Archie out of her head. She was so busy killing the priest that she completely forgot about him. She felt very ashamed and decided to visit the prince. The Empress stood near his room, but the concubine did not even think of coming out. The advisor decided that perhaps the guy had fallen asleep. Archie stood at the back of the room eavesdropping, while in the background a footman shouted at him to open the door, because if he delayed any longer, Her Majesty would simply up and leave. The prince was lost in his thoughts. He was thinking that Her Majesty had worn out his soul, so he too would show her that he was not such a simple man. The concubine heard the commander approach Sharon and tell her that he had important news for her. Archie opened the door, asking if the Empress was really going to leave him again. He rushed into her arms, begging her not to leave. Sharon said that she had important things to do, and she needed to go. But the sooner she left, the sooner she would return. The prince pressed himself against her and sobbed, pretending to cry. Having let her go, he set her the condition that he would wait in 30 minutes. But the Empress said that she would come in an hour. Let him wait for her. A letter from the high priest arrived from the temple, which meant that he could be contacted. The high priest wrote that he had heard about what had happened to Karen and that Her Majesty knew him, although he did not know the circumstances. But he believed that this was not an ordinary case of the expiration of a person's lifespan. The Supreme One promised to appear at the banquet, but this must remain a secret, since he does not want to reveal his identity. And even at the banquet itself, he will show himself only when he is sure that it is safe to be near Her Majesty. Gordon thought the priest was afraid, but in any case they had to be prepared for the unexpected, especially since the man probably didn't know how to fight. Sharon ordered that security be doubled so that there were no blind spots. Absolutely every area had to be guarded. While she was giving instructions, time flew by so quickly. Archie was waiting for the Empress in his room. Entering the prince's room, the girl found him sitting in the Buddha pose and chewing something that looked like a precious stone. Leaning closer to him, she saw that it was a candy. Sharon asked what kind of candy it was that he was chewing with such a look. The concubine grabbed her hand and pulled her towards him, throwing her onto the bed. The guy replied that it was a candy with the taste of the sea. Archie suggested that the Empress try the candy herself if she was so interested. Sharon agreed. Her Majesty asked the commander if he had ever been to sea. Gordon replied that yes, he had, but Sharon had never had the chance to go to sea, and she had never really wanted to. The guy invited her to go to the sea with him someday. She agreed, since she was still interested. Over a glass of wine, Sharon wondered how they had raised Ethan and Archie, who were brothers, but so different. Gordon smiled and said that the Empress was not similar to Fred, although he was her half-brother, but she was also not at all similar to her real brother. Sharon laughed and asked the commander a provocative question. Is she better than her brother? The guy fell silent, choosing between friendship and loyalty. Gordon never gave a full answer, but he said that he had always been on Sharon's side, because he was born to do so. Brian and Austin watched this scene from above. The chief of the Dark Forest joked, saying that the good-natured man looked scary, but the Lord's response was not long in coming. The guy said that any man would look like that if he saw how the woman he was in love with got along so well with another man. A few days later, on the day of the coronation celebration, after many events, the coronation celebration was successfully prepared. The Empress drank a cup of coffee on her balcony and watched the arriving guests, among them a country that cooperated with Fred. But Sharon did not know what kind of country it was. Her Majesty ordered that security be ensured so that the High Priest could approach her with confidence, and that there should be no incidents today. The commander warned that the High Priest was expected to arrive, but another person disguised as him might also come. The man who killed the old man may have committed the murder, and then accidentally found the letter. But he could also have attacked the Empress if he knew where the letter was in the first place. Considering the suspicious damage to the Imperial tomb, it can be assumed that there was an enemy on the other side. Sharon foresaw what was troubling Gordon and had a way to test it. She approached him and said that she had a secret that only he would know. Finally, the banquet began in the evening. Numerous gifts and congratulations from high-ranking guests poured in from all sides. After listening to everyone, Sharon decided that it was time to find the High Priest. But an advisor approached her and said that she needed to choose a concubine for the first dance. She invited Jacob to dance, because one way or another, his family contributed to her ascension to the throne, and because of the harem, he became a laughingstock. So Her Majesty had to save him at least this way. During the dance, the concubine confessed that the Empress's indifference was crushing his heart. Jacob said that he had been waiting and was always waiting for her. But Sharon broke the romantic note in his words with her question of whom exactly he was waiting for. Her or the Empress. The Empress believed that there was more desire in the lips of a devotee than in lips whispering of love. And the concubine said that her words could be trusted. The concubines, left without a partner, began to dance with each other. The Empress could not understand what was happening. Sharon overheard a conversation about the High Priest, or rather, the fact that he had not yet been caught. She couldn't understand who was talking about this so frivolously. The man saw the Empress and began to bow to her, flattering her in the eyes that he was glad to see her. But in his thoughts, he was thinking about what she was doing here. He caught her gaze on him and asked if Her Majesty wanted to ask him anything, but he received a negative answer. The man left. Sharon wondered if he was clearly aiming at the High Priest. Could there really be someone here who wanted to harm him? The Empress decided to follow him, since the gentleman was clearly worried about something and was looking out for someone. Through the window, Her Majesty saw how the High Priest was surrounded. Among them was a knight of the palace. It turns out the problem was inside. Bursting into the circle with a smile on her face, Sharon said that they had nothing to worry about, because the choice was hers, kill or catch. The man scattered the attackers without any effort. The Empress was in complete shock. The man looked like a secret guard, and not like a high priest. He bowed before her and thanked her for saving his life. Her Majesty was about to put the attackers in prison, but the man stopped her, saying that his identity could not be identified. The man looked like he was the king of mercenaries, which Sharon asked him about directly. He confessed that he was the high priest. The Empress thought that the high priest would look like an angel from a famous book. Perhaps it was because of God's love that his muscles were so swollen. The man suggested simply erasing the attacker's memories. He grabbed one of the attackers by the throat, trying to strangle him. Sharon tried to stop him, explaining that killing was not the answer and she had to find out why they attacked. The guards arrived. The Empress ordered that these bastards be sent to prison, without the right of visitation, and that she make sure that no one entered or left the prison. As for the High Priest's face, it was clearly not what Sharon had imagined. The Empress asked for proof that the man was indeed the High Priest. He touched the wound on her leg and the wound healed in a second. Her Majesty began with the main thing. Before the old priest's visit, a man suddenly appeared and declared that he had killed the Emperor. Trying to name the real name of the criminal, he suddenly spat out blood. The man died, uttering only a phrase for them to worship the Lord. And the next day, the priest, under a curse, confirmed these words. After that, the Empress saw that the priest was killed. The High Priest was attacked, and the group using the curse seemed to no longer want to remain silent. The High Priest did not know how to help, since he had no idea how to drive out this evil spirit. Sharon wondered if one day the group killed a cursed man in the square or something like that. Something like an attack of the dead, or scavengers, or something like that would happen. The High Priest suggested that the great sage might know how to combat this. He really didn't know how to drive out this evil spirit, but he could suppress the black magic with his very existence. The High Priest asked the Empress to take him to the harem. Returning to the palace, Sharon was met by the commander, who was worried that she had disappeared somewhere. She reassured him by saying that she had decided to get some fresh air and take a little walk. Brian approached the Empress with a glass of wine and offered it to her, as she looked exhausted. The guy decided to be a little bolder and invited Sharon to dance with him. An hour ago, the High Priest asked Her Majesty to make him a concubine. He was pursued by many people, but when the High Priest saw the Empress, he thought that she could protect him. Sharon thought about attracting a handsome man with a strong body and such an outstanding appearance as a concubine. He was ideal for a harem. She planned to make a public proposal to join the harem, so the man simply had to agree. But there was one catch. Sharon can't really fall in love with him, and therefore sincerely show it, so the chosen one must stand out enough to be noticed. Previously, the High Priest was unsure, as he always hid, but now he promised to do everything possible to be noticed. Sharon's face flushed with embarrassment. The High Priest decided to win her heart with his dance, and besides the Empress, everyone around him was impressed by the man's inability to dance, but his enormous self-confidence. Everyone present at the banquet whispered among themselves. They were amazed by the guy's courage and the way he allowed himself to behave in front of the Empress. Brian tried to distract Her Majesty with conversation, but she paid no attention to him, not taking her eyes off the priest. When the guy finished his performance, Sharon rushed towards him, admiring the strong man and his dance. The Empress publicly stated that the stranger had broken the lock on her heart and entered it. Duke Mitchell was furious at Her Majesty's carelessness. Austin began to make fun of Brian, thereby infuriating him. Then the concubine turned to the king of mercenaries, but there was no expression on his face. The guy said that he felt unwell and left the banquet. Austin stood there confused. Either this was how the new rival affected him, or something really happened. Her Majesty was informed that Charles was not feeling well, and had therefore left the banquet. She came to visit him and find out what was the matter. Sharon walked into his room. The guy was sitting on his bed. His face was paler than usual. The guy admitted that he was not sick, but did it out of jealousy. Night dungeon. The treasurer and the commander were going to escort the Empress, but Sharon declared that she would go alone, and her order was not to be discussed. Having woken up the prisoner, she said with a smile on her face that before they began to talk, she would like to make an offer to confess on her own, since she was, after all, a merciful Empress. Sharon asked the next question. Why did the prisoner hit her man at the party? If anyone has an excuse, then she can let them go. None of the detainees opened their mouths. During interrogation, it was assumed that the answers given later were closest to the truth. Her Majesty promised to take into account the criminal she catches next time, so it turns out that 9 out of 10 do open their mouths. Leaving the dungeon, the commander ran up to the Empress and began to wipe the blood from her cheek. The girl calmed him down, saying that it was not her blood. The group split up and she managed to find out that her brother Fred was still alive. The connection was broken. It seems the High Priest noticed the balls that were placed in the heads of the group members and broke them. The guy was worried about whether the meeting with the Empress had taken place. The masked man asked if the gentleman was pleased, but he had no reason to be dissatisfied, since his brother did everything so cleverly. If he was so easily hurt, then perhaps even this guy's touch would be painful for Fred. Sharon couldn't understand what the reason was, because this time she definitely heard the truth. One of the captives asked if the Empress knew about the fox, but it was the first time she had heard this name or title. Fred, who was executed, is actually alive, and with the help of Fox, who is his sage, he does all the work. As long as Fred had these beads, he could know the location of the high priest. After Fox put them on the high priest, they began to emit something strange. Sharon remembered that when the high priest was nearby, her head hurt so much that she could not even say anything. But what kind of beads were these? This question tormented the Empress. Her head was filled with thoughts about Fred, about whether he was alive, whether he had used black magic, or whether he had been a sorcerer from the very beginning. If Her Majesty's half-brother could use his ability to read the truth at will, he would immediately know who was loyal and who was a traitor. To begin with, Sharon decided to contact her brother and ask him to meet with her and the great sage. Because if he is a great sage, then he can definitely know something. The next day, everyone was hotly discussing the Empress's new concubine. The Empress's advisor escorted the high priest to his room. The boy was delighted with his new room, which could not be said about his servant. At first, his master had to pretend to be a casino dealer. Now he was in the role of a concubine. And then the unknown awaited them. High Priest Jared decided to stay in the shadows to avoid enemies, and the Empress had strong arms and a powerful sword. Besides, she possessed the greatest power in the world, so that was quite enough to protect him. The treasurer entered the room to inform Jared that Her Majesty was waiting in her room that evening, as his dance was sincere, but the people were in a serious mood. Although the high priest pretended to be a concubine to hide, he had no intention of actually being one. Entering Jared's room, Sharon saw the following picture. The guy, covered with only a blanket, was lying on his bed completely naked. She wrapped him in a blanket and demanded that he get dressed immediately. The guy seemed to have forgotten what he had said earlier. He looked dissatisfied with the fact that he had been refused. The Empress reminded him that he was not a real concubine. Her Majesty quickly changed the subject. She had come here for something else, to find out if the high priest had subordinates he could control undercover. Sharon was concerned about subordinates who could do less than clean work without complaint. And even if they were caught, they could take care of everything themselves during interrogation. Jared told about the existence of an organization consisting of first-class warriors, which is called the 100 Hwarang. The Empress thought, it seems she heard this name somewhere. This organization would do whatever the high priest said, but that was probably not exactly what the Empress wanted. They were more like an influential escort group. The Hwarangs respected the guy due to the fact that he was the high priest. Sharon wasn't interested in respect, only in unconditional loyalty. She also wanted to know if various abilities had started to appear and disappear, and if Jared knew anything about it. The guy had never heard of such a thing, and the Empress was a little disappointed, since her new acquaintance did not help in any way. Sharon decided to find out everything on her own, and the first person she wanted to talk to was Jacob. His expression remained unchanged, and his voice was cold and reserved. This guy could be the perfect person to spy on. After some time spent in complete silence, Her Majesty stood up and was about to leave, when the concubine stopped her and asked her to stay, but Sharon left anyway. Jacob looked upset after this situation. Next in line was Austin. The guy was smiling broadly as usual, but there was a certain mystery hidden in this smile. He approached the Empress, hugged her, and kissed her on the head, saying that he was starved for love. The Empress stroked his shirt as it unbuttoned, and before her eyes stood a man with a gorgeous figure. Austin felt embarrassed, his face turning red as Sharon stared at him so intently, his heart starting to pound. Changing the subject, the concubine asked why the Empress had actually come here, whether she really wanted to ask him about something. The girl said with displeasure that no, she was just passing by and began to leave. Entering the prince's room, Sharon saw a picture of him, the knight, and the footman throwing a party and dancing. Archie said that he had long wanted to learn to play musical instruments, and now the time had come. In which case, Her Majesty decided not to interfere with him. The prince ran after Sharon, stopping her. When asked what he wanted, Archie stood and looked at her. Her Majesty felt the beating of his heart. She invited him to take a walk together. The concubine was overjoyed by such an offer. After seeing a report of a conflict between a palace official from the Western Estate and the Lord's son-in-law, the Empress began to suspect the treasurer of being a spy. But things were not that simple. Sharon was informed that the Holy Father and His Highness Prince John had arrived. The Empress was very happy to see her elder brother. She immediately threw herself into his arms. After treating the guests to dinner, Her Majesty began by saying that the reason she wanted to see the Holy Father this time was connected with something serious. She needed to know if the man knew anything about exorcism. Lately, strange things have been happening in the Imperial Palace. Someone left a trace of black magic at the Imperial tomb, and after some time, the man who confessed to the attack and murder was cursed and died suddenly. From what the Empress heard from the priest, it could be said that the curse was a field of black magic. So if the cursed corpse decomposed, it could give birth to unclean creatures. That is why precautions were taken, as Her Majesty did not want the corpse to awaken the dead here, but so far no progress was observed. The Holy Father also studied such phenomena. But all these wars or epidemics of serious diseases in the past, they all turned into legends that were simply passed from mouth to mouth. The man managed to find out that every 500 years black magicians are reborn, and when they are reborn, in addition to them, unholy creepy creatures are resurrected. These terrible creatures ate the dead themselves. There were also vampires who drank the blood of living people. The dead usually did not wake up in the infected area, but nevertheless, they were dangerous due to their numbers and ability to infect others. Those who ate the dead and vampires were not infectious. There were few of them, but they hid well, pretending to be people. Black magicians were people, but by uniting with creatures, they increased their powers. And the accumulation of all these powers is the Lord who controls them. Sharon knew little about the Lord, but she did know that it had something to do with the 500-year cycle of rebirth and the false emperor she had spoken of earlier. The Empress confessed to her brother that when Fred was dying, he called for the Lord, and at her coronation, a group of mercenaries suddenly appeared, who said during interrogation that they came on Fred's orders. The Holy Father concluded that if His Majesty the Prince was alive and this Lord existed, then sooner or later they would have to be found and killed. There was no other option, because if the flash of the dead appeared before they found Fred, then disaster could not be avoided. As far as the man knew, vampires and corpse-eaters were inactive in daylight. The Holy Father promised to find out more, and to use all his skills to find out the whereabouts of His Highness, Prince Fred, and to find out if there were other ways of exorcism or methods of exorcism. The Empress had a brilliant idea. When another person is excited or weakened, or when he has something he strongly desires, without a doubt, this is the best moment for revelations. Sharon ordered the commander to assemble the first guard immediately. The reason that the palace was attacked without anyone noticing was the irresponsibility of the guards, and Her Majesty decided to punish them. She ordered to run 50 laps around the parade ground. The wet, sweaty, and exhausted guards stood before Her Majesty. The girl said that in fact, this punishment was not given to them for the attack on the palace. In fact, there was a spy among the knights, and Sharon did not notice him. The men began to look at each other and whisper that this could not be. Sharon was convinced that he couldn't do it all alone. Someone was behind it all. She hoped that Fred wasn't alone. Looking at the Empress's thoughtful face, the commander asked if everything was okay. But Her Majesty joked, saying that everything was fine, and as soon as she knew something for sure, she would immediately share it with him. The knight was depressed. He had the feeling that he had been excluded from the Empress's inner circle of trust. But this was not entirely true. Sharon did not even fully trust her own resolve. The Empress decided to meet with Austin again to give him a task. She wanted to introduce one nice guy into the first guard without any honors, but everything had to go well. When the guy realized that it was a matter of espionage, he suggested to the Empress that it would be better to introduce 2 or 3 people to make it more reliable. Sharon refused. She only needed one spy. Since it shouldn't take long, she was going to start looking for the leader soon. Her Majesty decided to organize surveillance herself in order to find the leader. Initially, the girl was going to carry out surveillance on her own, but then she decided to take the chief of the Dark Forest with her. But soon regretted it, because the guy talked incessantly. The concubine suggested passing the time by pointing to a huge mansion. Upon entering the estate, they were greeted warmly by a man who turned out to be the head of the Lost Province and Austin's father. The father was surprised by such a visit. Although he was glad to see his son, he asked if he was really bored with the harem, that he decided to visit his father. But the boy replied that he had business nearby, and that is why he was here. Austin, in the eyes of the Empress, was magnificent, like the head of an entire country. For a moment she even forgot that he was the chief of the dark forest. The gentleman noticed that someone was following them. He asked his son who it was. The boy laughed and replied that it was Her Majesty who had assigned a servant to him. At dinner, the father asked his son whether he had not slept with Her Majesty since he had been in the harem. Having received a negative answer, the master was outraged. Couldn't his son take advantage of his excellent appearance and make Her Majesty fall in love with him? The concubine laughed and agreed with his father that it was a good idea. Sharon found it amusing that people talked about her in her presence. The father prepared for his son a special powder that makes his skin pearly, as well as clothes that look quite indecent even if you don't take them off. He handed Austin a couple of outfits and ordered him to sneak a peek at Her Majesty and take her to the park. After dinner, Sharon and the concubine left the palace. The guy was all red with shame, and in the girl's hands was a bag with those very things from her father. The girl was going to get rid of these strange things with her own hands. After leaving the palace, the Empress and her concubine continued to follow them. And finally, the man, who was acting rather suspiciously and looking around, entered an alley where a group of people were waiting for him. The Empress smiled. She was sure that they would soon be able to find out who made these inscriptions on the Emperor's tomb. The Dark Forest chief was planning to take revenge on the imposters by writing humiliating things on their faces and hanging them upside down. But Sharon allowed him to do whatever he wanted. On the roof of the house, the Empress saw a man in a fox mask. Sharon decided to follow Fox and ordered Austin to follow the stranger into the alley. In one of the courtyards, Her Majesty managed to catch up with a masked stranger. She thought about whether to take off his mask and find out who was behind it, or to start making him worry. Just as she was about to pull off his mask, they were surrounded by people with clubs. They were about to attack the Empress. Sharon thought they were Fox's subordinates, but it didn't look like they were in cahoots, as they were also attacking the masked man. Her Majesty decided to fight shoulder to shoulder with this guy, and after some time, the enemies were defeated. Coming close to Sharon, Fox said that she should be more careful. It was not safe for her to walk around like this alone, and that she should value herself more. The Empress asked who he was. The guy replied that he was a lord. Before she had time to look back, the man in the mask had disappeared, and Austin was standing next to the Empress with two strangers on his shoulders. They were unconscious. The concubine was surprised that she had caught more people than he had. The Dark Forest chief asked if Sharon had caught that guy, but she changed the subject and asked that everyone caught be sent to jail, since she could never ask him to lie about it to everyone. Vallejo. Sandra became Empress, but it was just a title. Her husband painted a portrait of his first love every night. Not wanting to touch his legal wife even with a finger, the girl was ready to run away without thinking. She dreamed of only one thing, that Caleb was alive. Suddenly she heard a voice similar to her lover. The voice was calling her. Sandra woke up in her room, with her nanny sitting next to her, and very happy that the Empress had come to her senses. It turned out that she had turned pale during the walk and fainted. The girl started crying. She definitely heard Caleb's voice. At the very least, there was definitely someone there. She was sure of it. But no matter what she said, no one would believe her. Colombia. The words of the so-called Lord did not leave Sharon's head. She was sure that he said it on purpose. And there was no point in arguing with those who could prove their innocence. No method would help here. However, Austin had aroused the Empress's suspicions before, but if she heard anything again that raised doubts, then it was worth conducting a thorough investigation, Her Majesty thought. In any case, her half-brother Fred was a fool. She had already taken his place long ago. The Empress came to the prison to talk to the prisoners, and the man, upon seeing her, immediately began shouting that he knew nothing. The man also did not know who he was working for, but was only following orders. The second prisoner was more accommodating, saying that they had only warned her that the killer was nearby, and that it was all in the name of the true heir to the throne. The Empress warned him that they were now so carelessly guarding the position acquired with the blood of others, but soon they would be judged fairly. The man laughed like a madman. Near the entrance to the prison, Austin, the commander and the treasurer were waiting for Sharon. The guys simultaneously asked if everything was okay with her. Before she could answer, the concubine came up, took her by the arms and led her aside. He was interested in what the prisoners had said. At that moment, the treasurer and the commander stood in complete confusion. Her Majesty said that one of the spies said that this was done in the name of the true owner of the throne. Austin concluded that what happened at the tomb was the work of Fred's followers. But Sharon did not confirm this. Gordon was angry because this concubine also became the Empress's confidant. Austin hugged the Empress and lay on her shoulder. She did not understand whether he was really so glad that Fred was alive. But no, the concubine was glad that Her Majesty was so smart. Here the commander intervened. He suggested that the true heir might be someone else, not necessarily her half-brother. At that very moment, it dawned on Sharon that maybe they were talking about her own brother, John. Sharon herself could not believe what she was thinking, because John said that he could easily ascend to the throne, but he himself resigned because he did not like all this, and all her brother's supporters knew about it. Although the Empress denied it, Gordon's statement should have been taken into account. Perhaps something had changed during this time, including John. She may well have been disliked by some of his supporters. Sharon decided for herself that instead of being careful not to get hit, she would be on guard and prepare for everything in advance. The girl was not going to trust anyone. The next evening, Her Majesty thought that she could not combine business and painting. There was no end to state affairs, so she could not freely dispose of her time as before, but she could choose trusted people and divide the duties between them. Sir Gordon has been trusted since childhood and is still a trusted confidant, entrusted with various tasks, and he was also friends with her brother. The girl decided to get the commander drunk, because if a person drinks a lot of alcohol, his mental abilities decrease and he begins to share what is on his soul. Sharon invited Gordon to have a drink with her, pretending that she was not at peace with herself. After a few bottles of wine, the Empress was very drunk. She began to ask the commander if he liked someone. The guy remained steadfast, trying to convince Sharon that she was very drunk. The Empress fell asleep. Sir Gordon poured himself a glass of wine and did not take his eyes off her. His heart was also uneasy. If only he could confess to her. He spoke to the sleeping Empress. The commander's speech was interrupted by the Countess entering the room. He asked her to pretend she knew nothing about it. The Countess expressed her thoughts to the Sir. She believed that a man needed more than just a lover. For Her Majesty, the guy was like a close friend and brother. But if he had feelings for the Empress, it would complicate everything. All Sharon needed now was a reliable knight protector who could be trusted to watch her back. And the commander was not one of those concubines who could not help. Gordon's gaze was very sad. He still hoped that Her Majesty would not open her heart to someone else. The next morning, the Empress was lying in her bed and dying from a hangover. She didn't even know how to drink properly. The nanny brought her honey water for a hangover. Who would have thought that the commander could drink? The Countess reported that Sir Gordon had come by yesterday, and that the Empress had nothing to worry about. Even though she was very drunk, he had taken good care of her. Sharon decided to put everything aside with the commander and move on to questioning the concubines. And the first of them will be Brian. Brian was extremely surprised that the Empress liked alcohol. Her Majesty laughed. She did not like alcohol, but she believed that sometimes it was worth drinking when it was necessary, and in this case, a frank conversation was ahead. Brian had not done anything yet, but they lived together in the same palace, through thick and thin. Of the concubines, the guy got along best with the others, in Sharon's opinion. The girl believed that there was nothing wrong with trying to find out something through the Lord. The boy felt dizzy from drinking. Even though he didn't know how to drink, he couldn't stop after the Empress offered him a drink. The following evening, a frank conversation over alcohol awaited Prince Archie. Sharon immediately began by asking what the concubine thought of her. The prince confessed that he was in love with her, adored her, and would very much like to reveal his feelings, but could not yet, since his love was unrequited. Her Majesty was delighted. It turned out not to be as difficult as she had imagined. The next question concerned the death of the Emperor, or rather Archie's opinion on it. The concubine was very sympathetic to Sharon, and understood how hard it was for her when she lost her father. His brother also suffered greatly when their father died, and could not come to terms with it. And when Archie tried to console him, Ethan said that the Emperor did not need consolation. One way or another, the prince could not console Her Majesty, as he was afraid that he would hear the same thing. The concubine believed that if a person cannot open up when he is sad, then it must be difficult. Until now, Sharon hadn't even thought about it because she was focused on hating Ethan. And when he was in trouble, she couldn't be there for him. It seemed that Archie had completely passed out from the wine he had drunk and Her Majesty had to stop. Sharon came into the High Priest's room. She had a request. She asked him to make her some kind of amulet. She asked the guy to make an amulet for Archie, since he had recently lost his. After some time, the Supreme presented Her Majesty with 2 talismans. Having placed it around the Empress's neck, he said that she also needed a talisman, especially since it was quite effective. Sharon got out a bottle of wine for them to drink together, but the priest refused, as priests were forbidden to do so. Her Majesty was surprised. Hadn't he recently been waiting for her in the room naked to sleep with her, and hadn't he worked as a dealer in a casino? The priest stopped her, saying that there was no prohibition on sleeping with Her Majesty, and there was no prohibition on working as a dealer in a casino, but there was a prohibition on drinking alcohol. The last one in line was Carl. The concubine was very glad of the Empress's favor. He had been waiting for her arrival for a very long time. At some point, the king of mercenaries began to lose consciousness and fell straight to the floor. Sharon began to scream for help and call for a doctor. The boy came to his senses and began to insist that the Empress not call a doctor, since he was fine. The doctor finally came. Carl had a slow heartbeat, and the force of the blow was very weak. The guy looked very weak. The doctor prescribed the mercenary king medicine to improve his heart function, and told him that he should not overexert himself as he was very weak. Carl asked Her Majesty not to leave, but to stay with him, as he was ill. Sharon stayed with the concubine. She looked at him while he slept. The guy was sexy even with his eyes closed. The mercenary king could not drink alcohol because he was feeling unwell, but the Empress needed to find out everything. Her Majesty wondered if he could be sincere while he slept, because his thoughts were free and his body was weak in sleep. Sharon, without even understanding how, found herself in an unfamiliar place, surrounded by people in strange clothes, and among them stood Carl with some red-haired girl. The girl insisted that he should live on, but the king of mercenaries, with tears in his eyes, begged him to take him with him. But the red-haired girl begged him to live on. Her Majesty was touched. She did not know who this stranger was, but she would like Carl to do what she said. A farewell kiss took place with tears in the eyes. Sharon was able to see everything while falling asleep. The concubine sees nightmares and experiences pain. The next morning, this red-haired girl never left the Empress's mind. It was a heartbreaking love story that lasted thousands of years. Sharon couldn't finish it today. She was too confused about everything. So first she decided to deal with the affairs according to the official schedule, and the rest had to be postponed until tomorrow. Rumors that the Empress was visiting her concubines one after another and inviting them to drink wine with her spread throughout the palace. Her Majesty could not take care of one person, but had to take care of everyone. Jacob noticed that the girl was talented in flirting. The concubine believed that if the Empress didn't like it, she could simply return to business and take her mind off things. Wouldn't it be easier to take care of a few populists rather than have 6? Sharon stared at him, her eyes unwavering. Jacob's gaze was enough to freeze you, to freeze to death. She offered him a drink, and not to get angry, the concubine asked why he was forcing them to drink with her. The Empress replied that it was easier to make friends this way. It promoted sincerity. She could not come to everyone, since she had a lot to do after the coronation. But she would like to get to know everyone better. The guy looked especially suspicious. Sharon decided to talk about his youth. Jacob said that he lived in the temple for some time, but before she could finish, the guy stood up, as if intending to do something. The concubine headed for the exit, as if the Empress had started a topic he didn't want to talk about at all. He went and lay down in bed and fell asleep. Her Majesty was in complete shock. Sandra's father couldn't believe his daughter's words, because Caleb was dead, and there were witnesses at the execution site, although there weren't many of them. The man decided that the girl had been having a hard time, and that she had imagined it all. He hugged his daughter and said reassuringly that sooner or later Ethan would suffer just like her. And if Sandra endured all this with pride, then after some time everything would definitely work out for her. Even those dear to the Empress would rather believe that the sky would fall than believe in all this, because even her father did not believe her. Sandra was sure she heard Caleb's voice, and suddenly the music that her lover liked started playing. The girl decided to take a walk. The guards did not hear this melody. It turns out that only she heard it. She ordered the guards to remain in place. Sandra wanted to go on alone. The Empress followed the sound, opened the door of the room from which it was coming, and saw a silhouette in the shadows playing the piano. Could it really have been Caleb? But he was dead, Sandra thought. She asked to prove that it was him. The silhouette said that when she was 10 years old, she wanted to run away from the temple with him, but he stopped her. For Caleb's 30th birthday, Sandra wanted to give him a special blade made of glass, but then her father got angry. The Empress could not hold back her tears. She could not believe that he was alive and how he managed to return. The silhouette asked her to come closer, as he did not want to scare her, but Sandra was already scared enough. Caleb really did return alive, but the Empress couldn't believe her eyes how this happened. The next morning, the high priest was enjoying his body and ordered his servants to bring him ice cream to eat and bask in the sun. The Empress was making no progress. It was strange that everything was going so smoothly. Even Austin was quite talkative. She couldn't just give up and decided to change tactics. Her Majesty was informed that the high priest had been seriously injured after falling down the stairs. Sharon rushed to him. The doctor smiled, saying that it seemed like the guy was waiting for her. Despite the fact that his servant was screaming and crying, he didn't have any reaction. The priest overheated in the sun and stumbled, although the Empress had already thought that one of the concubines was to blame. Austin approached Brian, calling him an innocent gentleman, and said that the next time someone pushed Mr. Brian, they should think that he did it. The Lord pretended not to understand what was being discussed and why he was considered cute. Archie, seeing how the two concubines were getting along so well, said after them that they could continue holding hands and then leave the harem on good terms. Because who knows, maybe the two of them will suddenly be pushed together and break their necks. Austin looked at the prince with confusion, because just a few days ago they had been talking very well about life abroad. Archie commanded Austin to follow him or he would break his neck. Brian was confused because Austin was talking to him now. The chief of the Dark Forest did not lose his composure, hugged the boys and suggested that the three of them go for a walk together. Sharon walked into the high priest's room. The guy was standing upside down on one hand, as if there was no fracture and he had not fallen down the stairs. The boy assured the Empress that she should not worry, as he was completely fine. He could easily fix anything except instant death, including regrow bones. But before that, people came to him for something else, and he couldn't do it right away. The high priest thought that if he healed too quickly, people would look at him strangely, so he would pretend to be in pain for a while. Sharon got back to business. She asked the guy if it was true that he fell himself, because every time she thought about it, she realized how impossible it was. The priest smiled. He liked the Empress's intelligence. The next question was whether the guy had seen the criminal's face. He was unsure, so he couldn't say anything for sure. The man who pushed the priest was not an ordinary man, as he had to be quite strong to be able to push him. At that moment, just for a moment, he felt darkness and some kind of evil presence. Sandra's maid asked the Empress not to worry, as she would return soon, but the girl was calm. She let her go to rest properly with her family. Sandra was informed that her maid had committed suicide. The girl could not believe it, as she was sure that the woman had no problems. Sharon and the high priest were walking through the park. The guy had to focus on suspicious characters around. Whoever the criminal was, he must be a person who possesses special powers. Perhaps the spy they were looking for is a sorcerer. The high priest saw the one who attacked him and began to scream. Jacob stood in front of them. Temple in the capital of the empire, Vallejo. Sandra wanted to give her maid a parting gift and asked to open the coffin to put her favorite mirror inside. The coffin was opened. It was empty. Sharon asked the priest if he felt a dark aura from Jacob. But no, his soul was innocent and pure, and the priest was confused by his eyes, which right now seemed to be trying to burn him alive. The guy found everything somehow confusing. Jacob wondered if the Empress really trusted this man so much. Sharon admitted that he is one of the few who is worthy of her trust. The concubine asked if the boy was really that sick. The high priest laughed loudly, saying that Her Majesty was his, forbidding the concubine to come closer than 5 steps to her, and if he did try, he would personally kill him. Sharon began to cover his mouth, pretending that the guy had not yet fully recovered from the fall and was talking nonsense. Jacob assured that everything was fine and he would be happy to listen to whatever this casino dealer had to say. Her Majesty thought that the concubine was the ideal type. Just looking at him, you felt as if he saw right through you. Since the deceased was from a noble family and was a lady-in-waiting to the Empress, soldiers guarded the morgue as a sign of respect so that no one could steal her body. But Sandra had an idea that the corpse had gotten up and walked out on its own, especially since this would not have surprised her. The Empress ordered the carriage to be prepared. She was going to visit the Marquis, on the outskirts of the capital Vallejo. Sandra arrived at the Marquis's estate, but he was not at home. She decided to ask the butler if he had seen anything suspicious before the incident with her maid. The man didn't tell her anything new, only what everyone already knew. The Empress was about to leave the estate, as she felt awkward being there without her owners. But on the way to the carriage, a servant stopped her and handed her some kind of bag. There was an amulet in it. The girl said that among her relatives there was a priest, and he received this amulet from the high priest. And when the lady saw it, she said that she would make a necklace out of it and would definitely give it to the Empress. Therefore, the deceased herself prepared it for Sandra. The Empress did not accept the amulet, but asked that it be given to the Marquise, as that would be more correct. Village on the border of Colombia. Sharon was informed that the Hwarang detachment had arrived. It was very important, so Her Majesty needed to be present. The Empress wondered why they had come, whether it was connected with the death of the old priest, or whether it was all because of Jared. One day, the High Priest told Sharon that there was a certain Hwarang detachment, an organization consisting of elite warriors. The Empress ordered that a restroom and lunch in the dining room be prepared for the warriors, and then she would receive them. The girl went to the High Priest to talk to him, and he was just heading to the Empress to tell her something. The boy apologized for not telling Her Majesty that the detachment always accompanies him, but watches from the sidelines. And then they showed up so openly and without warning. Sharon wondered what the best thing to do was, since the Hwarang knew everything. They were unlikely to just leave the palace. But if they lingered in the imperial palace, it would soon become clear that this was all because of the High Priest. Everyone in the area was talking about how the Hwarang squad was the most elite military squad, which meant that something special had happened since they decided to meet with Her Majesty. When asked what they needed in the imperial palace, the soldiers knelt down and began to ask permission to accompany the High Priest. One of the warriors stepped forward. He was the leader of the squad named Walter. The Empress asked the leader to follow her. The commander of the guard was supposed to escort him to his place of residence. Sometime before this, Her Majesty spoke with the High Priest, and they decided that he would be the official knight accompanying Jared, thereby revealing his identity. Sharon asked the knight if he knew anything about black magic. The guy froze in bewilderment. In his opinion, this was not something that the Empress should be interested in. The Empress had to tell that she had recently found traces of black magic. The knight was very surprised and said that we must try to catch whoever was doing this and get rid of this magic as quickly as possible. The Empress admitted that being a believer is such a burden. In the first days of her reign, she had to prove herself as a strong monarch, so she was not allowed to reveal her views. But she does not believe. This was a great shock for the guy, because it was the complete opposite of the great empire. Walter admitted that he was very surprised when he saw Her Majesty in the audience hall back then, as she radiates a very bright and pure aura. The knight reported to the High Priest that the village was empty, so the warlock had disappeared. But no one knew when he might appear again, and also that Her Majesty was interested in black magic. The priest ordered to simply observe her for now, and let her know when he received more specific information about the Empress. The newspapers were filled with a sensation. Her Majesty's sixth concubine was the High Priest. People whispered that Sharon was trying to strengthen her position by using the High Priest. The Duke, reading the newspaper, understood why the Empress was interested in this man who had nothing but muscles. It turns out she had a plan. The High Priest was amused that people's opinions changed so quickly. They were so sensitive to change that they began to hate him. Prince Archie entered the garden. The priest's servant thought that now that the High Priest's true identity was revealed, the prince would have to change his attitude towards him. The guy was clearly angry. He demanded to get out of here, since there was no place for a High Priest here. After these words, Archie turned around and left. The prince ran into his room, fell on the floor, and demanded that the Empress be informed that he was ill. Sharon ran into his room. He was lying half naked, and kept saying that his body was burning, and that he seemed to have a fever. The Empress demanded that the prince get dressed, which was clearly not what he expected to hear. Archie couldn't understand how anyone could dislike him, since he was the prince of the Vallejo Empire, and the younger brother of the current emperor, as well as the possessor of unearthly beauty that everyone admired. A few days later, Sharon was informed that a delegation from Vallejo had left for them, and it looked like they would arrive in a few days. The Empress thought that after that incident, she and Archie had not seen each other again. He must have felt awkward now, and she was also interested in the question of how the other concubines reacted to the news about the High Priest. Everyone was saying the same thing. At first glance, the idea of a harem seemed like one of Her Majesty's simple wishes, but now it became clear to everyone that in fact, every member of the harem was either part of the imperial family or closely connected with officials from different walks of life. This was all reinforced by the fact that the High Priest was in the harem. and now everyone admired the insight and extraordinary decisions of Her Majesty. Lately, even the dark magicians had gone into hiding, which meant that Sharon could now calmly take care of state affairs. The high priest and the knight trained to meet Her Majesty in top form when she arrived here. A few more quiet days passed. The treasurer reminded that a delegation from Vallejo would arrive very soon, and most likely, Her Majesty should visit Mr. Archie. Suddenly, an ambassador from Volan arrived. The treasurer reported that, having learned of Her Majesty's relationship with the high priest, it was almost impossible not to react to it in some way. It was quite difficult. Although Volan was friendly to powerful countries, they had always been despotic and ruthless towards countries weaker than them. They were always looking for an opportunity to stab Columbia in the back, even though they acted friendly from the outside, and it didn't matter if it was Fred or the threat of black magic. If they found a weakness, they would definitely take advantage of it. Seeing that something was bothering the Empress, the commander began to reassure her that she had safely ascended the throne and was already ruling the country, and that the people were happy with her rule. Columbia was a strong nation, and they had their own power, Gordon believed. Her Majesty ordered the Marquis to do everything possible to ensure that the two delegations arrived at the same time, so as to encounter them all at once. The Empress decided that if Archie accompanied her on her visit, then at the very least the Vallejo would be satisfied. Volan knew nothing about Fred, and besides, the relationship between Columbia and Vallejo was quite close, so they might think that it would be useless to do anything against them. The treasurer was delighted with her idea. The maid, with a look of horror on her face, reported to Sharon that Prince Archie was feeling unwell and would not be able to attend the audience. The Empress burst into the concubine's room. Grabbing his hand and coming closer, she asked why people were so cruel. The Empress began to appeal to pity, saying that a delegation was arriving from the prince's home country, and he so cruelly refused to even come out to greet them. The concubine, unexpectedly for the Empress, fell on her shoulder. Sharon thought he had finally given in. She promised him that they would definitely discuss their relationship later, but she would still have to pretend in front of the delegation that everything was fine. After some time, the prince was in full combat readiness to meet with a delegation from his home country. Sharon reported that the delegation from Wallen had not given any notice of their visit, so they were forced to receive them all at once. A representative of the delegation from Volan took the floor, saying that they and Columbia had been long-standing allies. And since the Empress had only recently ascended to the throne, and as soon as the situation after the coronation had stabilized, they had come to offer an official welcome. They also learned that now, in addition to His Majesty Prince Archie and the heirs of the noble families of Columbia, a high priest has appeared in Her Majesty's harem, and therefore they expressed their congratulations. A spokesman for Volan warned that dynastic marriages are a very convenient way to consolidate power, but they can also have negative consequences for future generations, and if the relationship deteriorates, there will be consequences. Archie couldn't understand what this guy was talking about. The Empress said that this had happened before in Volan and she remembered everything, but Volan had already taught them from its mistakes. In conclusion, the representative said that since Sharon was going to conduct politics through dynastic marriages, it would be better to simply become Empress in another country, rather than dirty her hands with her own brother's blood to become one here. Everyone was shocked. How could the man say such a thing? Was he crazy? But there was no embarrassment on his face at all, which meant he was someone from the nobility. A stranger from the crowd of those present remarked that this man was like a foal who eats unripe grapes and complains because they taste sour, but forgets that in order to gather such influential people into his harem, one must have enormous strength and power. But Volan is a country that had to grovel before the others for the same purposes. Perhaps that is why they are not even able to understand how strong and powerful Her Majesty Sharon herself is. The man was furious. The voice of this stranger seemed painfully familiar to the Empress. She was left alone with the guy and asked him how he could think that she didn't recognize him. The stranger threw off his hood, and before the Empress stood her former entrusted one, Emperor Ethan. The Empress was angry that Emperor Vallejo had come. She believed that the guy had lost all shame since he arrived. If he got married, then let him take care of his wife, and she would take care of her harem. How Sharon wished he would leave right now. But since Ethan had come here with the delegation, his purpose was not only to see her. The conversation was interrupted by a delegation from Volan, and the Emperor immediately hid, hoping that he would not be recognized. Ethan laughed as the delegation retired to rest. trying to reassure Sharon not to be nervous, as the ambassador was still watching them. A knight of the emperor ran up to him, and one of the gentlemen stopped him and asked him to carry his luggage. He apologized profusely for leaving the emperor. The guy was worried about Ethan, believing that the duke would not leave things as they were, and it was unknown what he would do, but most of all, he was worried that the master did not have much time left to be safe. The emperor said that for some reason the snake couldn't even move, which was probably why he allowed Ethan to tell him everything he wanted. And besides, the emperor really came here to see Sharon. Emperor Vallejo headed to the harem. The knight ran after him. He was not sure if it was safe, since Her Majesty might get angry if her former lover suddenly met her current one. Empress Sharon was known for ordering the execution of her half-brother as a traitor. She is also known as a ruthless beauty who can easily lock a man in a tower. Ethan saw a guy in the garden. He had an angelic face and tiger muscles. It seemed he was the high priest. The emperor left the knight in the bushes and went to the priest. They talked about something, and then the high priest raised his majesty. The knight could not look at this any longer. He went to help, when a voice from behind stopped him. It was Prince Archie, who recognized him. The prince was curious about what had happened. He did not see the knight among the delegation. The boy stood at a loss. He could not tell the prince the whole truth. Archie began to whisper mockingly that since it was a secret that the head of the Imperial Guard was in Colombia, he had to hide him. The knight was confused. He had to call His Majesty for help. Sharon tried to relieve stress after meeting Ethan and ended up working too hard. She didn't want to do it, but there was a lot of work, and it was certainly better than wasting time. The Empress entered the room where the delegation from Vallejo was staying and asked how their emperor was doing. His subjects tried to pretend that they did not understand what was being said, but Her Majesty demanded that they not deny it, since she knew that he had arrived. His Majesty was sleeping now. Sharon didn't know what to do. She couldn't say that she hadn't heard anything about His Majesty since the high priest took him away. She met Brian in the corridor. He tried to talk to her, but she was furious and said as she passed by that they would talk later. The servant began to calm the concubine, because the Empress probably had urgent business, which is why she said so. Brian ordered to follow Sharon and find out where she was going. Entering the high priest's room, she saw Ethan there. They were chatting pleasantly. It turns out they had the feeling that they had known each other for a long time, so they started talking about all sorts of things. Sharon demanded that this stop. The high priest came close to her and took her hand, asking what had happened to her, as he was concerned about the Empress's unhealthy complexion. Her Majesty looked into Ethan's eyes, thinking that this guy had decided to turn everything in her heart upside down. She pulled Jared towards her and kissed him. The smile on the Emperor's face immediately disappeared. The high priest's servants brought him gifts that were given to him by representatives of the nobility. Seeing the redness of Jared's lips, the servant shouted in anger that who dared to touch the lips of the high priest and violate his chastity. The guy was silent, as if he hadn't heard the question. He looked embarrassed, which was not typical for a high priest. Sharon blamed herself for touching the high priest, because unlike the other concubines, he would leave the harem as soon as the danger was over. At the same time, she had 6 concubines, and Ethan should also live happily with his wife and concubines, because there was nothing left of their relationship. The Empress told her former lover. The guy was clearly not happy with what was happening, because she took his brother as a concubine and probably kissed him too. Austin climbed high up a tree to see something. Less than a minute passed before the guy fell from that very tree. The concubine was clearly pleased with what he saw while in the tree, but his servants were rather displeased with what he had to see. Austin said that he saw Emperor Ethan. Unfortunately, he could not hear him, since he was far away, but the concubine roughly understood what was being discussed. The Dark Forest chief knew that the Empress and Emperor had an affair in the past, and the guy was probably here on an unofficial visit. He was sure that even though it was all in the past, something remained, although he doubted that it had any great significance. Whatever feelings there were between them, Ethan was now married to someone else, so it was most likely over. The servant reassured the concubine, as there had been a lot of strange rumors circulating about Vallejo recently, for example, that the Emperor was planning a divorce and the like. A new rumor emerged. Members of the delegation discussed that Empress Sandra had gone mad. Austin was very surprised. Even his organization did not have such information, and he had the best informants. The servants even knew such details that Empress Vallejo saw a dead man, a dead prince, who allegedly ate his friend, because only a madman could say something like that. Sharon couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the Emperor. From a practical point of view, she was best with Ethan, simply because they had been through so much. She felt good with Archie too. Her Majesty felt the taste of the sea on his lips, and it was delightful. The Empress thought that Ethan would stop paying attention to her because of the situation with the High Priest, but on the contrary, he turned out to be so nice. Sharon blamed herself for kissing both brothers. The Empress had to get out of bed and tidy herself up because Austin came to report the rumors he had just heard regarding Empress Sandra. The chief of the Dark Forest thought that Prince Fred and Prince Caleb had nothing in common except that they were both dead. But it was quite surprising to hear two identical stories about two different people in two different countries. Sharon was amazed at how this could happen, because Empress Sandra seemed like a completely normal person to her when they saw each other. The concubine reproached the Empress that her gratitude for his work was only in words, and that he would have liked more. Her Majesty joked that until the guy got clothes that could be taken off with a snap, he wouldn't get anything. Austin had more news. The rebels who were captured in connection with the murder of the former Emperor of Columbia were trying to buy something. The piece of paper that the concubine handed to the Empress contained information about the auction of Sekri and the 12th item. If Her Majesty was hearing about such an auction for the first time, then the chief of the Dark Forest was aware that this was the name of an illegal auction house, not far from the capital. It is true that even under a lamp there is a dark place. So in this case, everything was happening under the Empress's nose, and she did not know what to do. It was simply impossible to close her eyes. But Austin was sure that he could benefit from this. Some madman grabbed Austin by the sleeve of his robe and demanded that he give it to him. And the Empress suspected something strange. Sharon thought there would be a tense atmosphere due to the auction being illegal, but everything was quite calm as the host announced lot number 12. This was why the Empress came with her concubine. Under this lot was presented an ancient map found in the ruins of a lost city, a lost country. The Empress was a little upset. She had hoped that it would be something like an unusual jewel or weapon. The auction ended. Her Majesty sat in silence, never raising her number to buy the card. The concubine was very surprised by such an act. Sharon's plan was to follow the buyer. Then they could immediately check whoever bought it for affiliation with the stormtrooper gang. Austin believed that the girl was definitely the type of monarch who could easily make independent decisions, and not just beat confessions out of people, and in the end, he was not mistaken about her. The Empress approached the buyer's carriage to offer to buy the lot, but the man immediately said that no matter what she offered, he would not sell the lot. Sharon took out her sword and put it to the man's neck, putting his life on the line. She didn't care that she was doing the wrong thing, since it was an illegal auction. The man said that if his life was worth that much, then what was the value of her life? He laughed, saying that it would even be funny for him to catch and tame such a capricious and impudent beast as she. After the sword fight, the man was unconscious, and in his carriage, Her Majesty tore his clothes off. Lord Brian's face was blank. He was thinking about how, after arriving, Her Majesty had immediately run to meet the High Priest. The servants began to reassure him, as if everyone knew that each of the concubines came to the harem only for power, money, or family connections. But only his master was the only one who loved the Empress. Brian sat there very upset about the whole situation, clutching some incomprehensible thing in his hands. He whispered through his teeth that he had not saved Her Majesty so that she would treat him like that. The servant became interested in what kind of incomprehensible thing his master was holding in his hands all the time. The concubine said that his father gave him this drug that makes men weak. The servants began to snatch this drug from the Lord's hands, since this thing was very dangerous. Brian said the drug's effects are temporary, lasting about a year, and that he hasn't needed to use it yet. The clerk smiled as he took the drug, saying that he would keep it for now and that as soon as he had the opportunity, he would get rid of it, especially since the gentleman himself said that he couldn't just throw it away. Since this was the case, the Lord decided to rely on him. The man woke up and didn't understand what the stranger was doing or why she needed his pants. The Empress found nothing in either his coat or jacket, so there must be something in his pants. The man shouted that he was the Empress's confidant, and that she would not get away with this just like that. Her Majesty was in shock. Having removed his mask, she realized that the man had lied. As far as she could see, his face was not so important. He was neither a concubine, nor even a close associate of the Empress. After receiving a few blows from Her Majesty, the man began to whine. Sharon could not believe that he was such a shameless liar, and how many times he had impersonated others. Finally, she found something valuable. If the man hid something in the lining of his trousers, then it must have been valuable. The stranger was angry. He asked who sent her. Sharon answered that she was from the Empress. The man did not believe her, asking if Justin sent her. Austin burst into the carriage and announced that they had to leave immediately, as there was a cliff ahead. The Empress couldn't just leave, she had to find out who was behind all this. Austin grabbed her and dragged her out of the carriage. The high priest discussed with Walter the sudden appearance of phenomena similar to black magic, and that the village had been destroyed in just a few days. The warrior remembered that some time ago he had spoken with the Empress about black magic, and he was worried by the fact that everything related to black magic always appeared before the Empress's eyes. The guy couldn't understand what was going on here. The Lord of Darkness, who leads all the forces of evil, is resurrected only once every 500 years to stop it, and at the same time his opponent is born. The time and date of the Savior's birth were known from the prophecy, so one day all the children who were born on the same day and at the same time were gathered together. But no one knew how to determine exactly which of them was the Savior. At that time, the temple did not have the same resources and influence as before, so they could not keep the children for more than 3 months, and one of them had to be sent home after only a month. Someone knocked on the high priest's balcony door, and when he stepped out onto the balcony, he saw Her Majesty standing before him. She asked him to walk with her. The Empress said that she went to the underground auction because she learned that the people who destroyed her father's crypt were looking for a map there. It was put up for auction. That is why she went there with Austin. Sharon didn't want to draw attention to herself, so she deliberately let someone else buy it for her. But then she still took the card back. During all this, something happened, and the guards from that auction started chasing them, when suddenly, the carriage exploded. The girl had no idea who could be behind this, but she only knew that the man who bought that lot at auction was very suspicious, because when the Empress took the map from him, he asked if she was in cahoots with Justin. Be that as it may, that wasn't the problem. Sharon promised to tell everything as soon as Austin woke up. Her Majesty begged the high priest to heal the chief of the Dark Forest. He was seriously injured. It didn't take long for Jared to use his magic to heal the wounds on the concubine's body. Sharon leaned her head on the high priest's shoulder. She was very glad that he was able to save the boy, since the Empress was very afraid that he might die. Austin said that Her Majesty should have said these touching words while hugging him, but for some reason she still hadn't done so. The Empress shouted loudly that the guy had gone crazy. The concubine pretended not to hear, approached Sharon and kissed her on the cheek, asking if she wouldn't rather be with him. While straightening his shirt, Her Majesty began to apologize. She could not ignore what the man had said. Austin tried to calm her down, because it was part of her duties, and so he knew from the start that Sharon had a good reason for it. The concubine was interested in what the man had said to the Empress. She replied that the stranger had mumbled more than he had spoken. The only thing she understood was that he did not know how to track down His Highness the Prince. The high priest intervened in the conversation. He did not understand which prince was being discussed. To clarify the situation for the high priest, Her Majesty briefly explained how it all began and what they had managed to find out during this time. Jared realized that in the course of all this, the names of the 2 dead princes had surfaced, while Sharon believed that the map they found was somehow connected to Fred, and regarding Caleb, it was already Vallejo's business. People have died because of this map, all just to keep it from falling into the wrong hands. It is obvious that this thing does not lead to treasures like gold and silver. The Empress decided that she had to find the traitor herself. The high priest tried to dissuade her, saying that it was dangerous and that it would be better if the Hwarang detachment did the job, but Sharon could not be persuaded. Since it was still unknown who the traitor was, Her Majesty decided not to take Austin to the palace. She was sure that the high priest, the chief of the Dark Forest, and Prince Archie were not traitors, but they were only 3 people. Jared still didn't support her idea of doing everything on her own, especially since if she was going to be absent for a long time, what would happen to the Empire? The girl did not intend to be absent for long, and also to continue to deal with state affairs in parallel, but she was going to ask her brother for help. Despite the doubts of some people around her, she was sure that her older brother could not be a traitor. His right hand hated Her Majesty, so he could have been in collusion with someone against her, but his brother would never have done such a thing. The Empress was convinced. It was time to return, because if the high priest lingered any longer, his assistant or one of the Hwarang squad would notice. After saying goodbye to the concubine, Sharon wished him a speedy recovery and returned to the palace. Without wasting any time, Her Majesty wrote a letter to her brother, saying that she would very much like him to come and help while she was away, and to stay at the imperial palace for 1 or 2 weeks if the Marquise needed help. Having sent the letter, the Empress sat down to study the literature concerning the city in which this map was obtained. She learned that the city, which was once prosperous, is now called cursed. While other states were built and collapsed, no one was able to take possession of this city, and everything in it remains in its previous state. Sharon had it all figured out that no matter how the country took over this place, they all inevitably collapsed due to internal conflicts, and so this city became a kind of cursed place. The Empress thought that it was quite unusual that a place that belonged to no one had become a shrine for archaeologists, since there were all sorts of dungeons and ruins there. Her Majesty's attention was distracted by Brian, who entered the library. For several days, Sharon spent time in the library searching for information, and all this time the concubine was nearby. The Empress looked at Brian, calling him devoted, because she always comes at different times, but he appears after her every time. The guy admitted that he still hadn't made friends with any of the concubines, and there was nothing to do in the harem. Despite his shyness, the concubine asked the Empress why she had recently become interested in books on archaeology. Sharon's answer was quite brief, as if her interest was connected with the not-so-good events that continued to happen in the palace. To break the awkward silence, Brian ran his finger along the spine of the book, reading its title. The Empress grabbed his hand and asked with great surprise if he could really read ancient languages. The concubine admitted that yes, he could, since he had once been very fond of them. But before he could finish speaking, Sharon asked him for help. She decided not to show him the map, but simply point out the symbols needed to decipher it. Then it would be much easier for her to understand the map herself. Her Majesty decided to thank Brian, because thanks to him, her investigation had progressed significantly without spending much time. So she asked him what he would like. The concubine became very worried, but said that his birthday was coming soon, and he would like to spend it alone with the Empress no matter where, as long as it was just the two of them. Sharon accepted his wish. The Empress asked the treasurer to tell her Brian's date of birth, and he immediately said that the concubine was born on May 17th, and there were 2 weeks left until his birthday. The girl needed to know how long it would take to get to the place marked on the map, because if she couldn't do it quickly, she would first have to celebrate Brian's birthday, and then go there. The Marquis reminded that after the Lord's birthday, there would be Lord Archie's birthday on the 1st of June, and then Jacob's birthday, which was exactly the same day as Her Majesty's. It turned out that Empress Sandra and Sharon's half-brother Fred had their birthdays on the same day. Her Majesty interrupted this discussion and asked for the birthday dates of the remaining concubines. Brian's servant wanted to use this terrible potion, which could deprive a man of his strength for a year, but did not know who posed a greater danger to his master. After going through various options, he decided to settle on Prince Archie, since the latter constantly mocked the young master and argued with him for no reason. The servant was angry with the prince, because he didn't even know that the Lord was as good on the inside as he was on the outside. Brian was a strong personality, not a wimp. Having made his way into the kitchen, the boy decided to keep an eye on the food that would be brought to this mad dog. Seeing a tray with food for the prince, he crept up unnoticed and poured the contents of the bottle into his plate, and also disappeared unnoticed. In the garden, he caught his breath. Brian's servants felt sorry for the prince as a man, but he reassured himself that it was only for a year, and if nothing works out for him with the Empress, then maybe at least this scoundrel will become more obedient, the guy concluded. The servants were carrying food for the concubines. Each guy had his own cart with the contents. One of the servants called out to the other and asked to exchange soup. Jacob looked at the soup and wrinkled his face. His servant was scared. What was going on after all? This was his master's favorite soup. The guy thought the mushroom soup was somehow strange. The employee tried the dish. It tasted quite ordinary. Jacob objected that they had brought him the same thing yesterday, but the guy began to justify himself by saying that usually the menu changes daily. But since the concubine loved mushroom soup so much, they had prepared it for him again. The concubine woke up in his bed exhausted. The servant in front of him was telling him how wonderful the weather was outside today. But then he noticed that Jacob was not feeling well. The concubine changed his clothes, tidied himself up, and looked at his palm. The phrase that everything would be fine tomorrow arose in his thoughts. The next day, Jacob lay in his bed and realized that something was wrong with him again. The Empress was furious. She realized that she had not moved from the spot. The people who made this map were clearly not in their right minds. The point marked on the map was near the capital Vallejo. Austin, who was nearby, said that the boundaries could have been different when the map was created. Her Majesty angrily replied that she knew about it too. The concubine smiled and thought that she looked like a flounder. Looking into the eyes of the Empress, the guy said that all lovers have nicknames. Could he in that case call her Flounder? If Sharon agreed to be his Flounder, then he would. But before Austin could finish speaking, the girl interrupted him and called him a goby, since she associated these fish with swindlers. The concubine realized that the topic of Vallejo was painful for the Empress, since her former lover lived there. He didn't know much about it, and Her Majesty couldn't tell him first. And it wasn't like the guy wanted to ask about it first. Sharon decided that there was nothing she could do about it, and that she had to go and look, since there was no other choice. Austin began to dissuade her, because it was dangerous and Her Majesty could be attacked again, but the girl only laughed in response, because she had the map and others, in her opinion, would not be able to find this place. She promised to act with caution, and it would be good if she could meet with Empress Sandra. Sharon thought she could get some information from her. The concubine realized that Her Majesty had decided to hide behind an official diplomatic visit. Their conversation was interrupted by Jacob's servant. He came to report that the concubine was calling the Empress. Sharon, knowing his character, was surprised that if he was calling her after she had been busy with other concubines lately, then something really had happened. Immediately heading to the harem, the Empress asked in a worried voice what had happened to him and whether anything hurt. Jacob shared his fears. He felt like he was terminally ill. The Empress was at a loss when she heard this news. She didn't know what to do. Gather all the servants of the harem and make them look after him, or send him home to his father to recover. The concubine said that he would not die from this disease, but his future children would. Sharon clutched her head, wondering if Jacob had seen this in his dream. Pointing to his male organ, the concubine said that one thing was not working as it should. Her Majesty was confused. Many questions immediately arose in her head. How this happened, from what moment, and in general, is Jacob sure? He felt it, and it didn't start today. Sharon exhaled a little, suggesting that they call the court doctor, as this might be temporary. The Empress thought that his desire had disappeared because his pride had been hurt, but that everything could be left as is. The concubine asked to make sure whether his fears were unfounded or not. After some time, Her Majesty admitted that Jacob really had no reaction. She suggested that it might be because the guy didn't experience any feelings. The concubine began to deny, because his heart reacted. The Empress asked Jacob if he was sure this had never happened to him before, but the boy immediately noticed that something was wrong with him. Sharon began to reassure the concubine that everything would be fine, since she had a way to help him. The high priest entered the room, and it was clear from his face that the Empress had forced him to come. The high priest was outraged that he had to examine the boy, but the Empress insisted. She wanted to get to the bottom of everything. With anger in his voice, Jared declared that he would not do what he hated, even though he was the high priest. Sharon grabbed him by the clothes and started yelling at Al that he hated taking care of the terminally ill. Jacob's whole body was like a dried-up bean sprout, even though the part of his body was a little embarrassing. But an illness is an illness. The high priest still insisted on his own. The mere thought that he had to put his hand to this place drove him crazy. Her Majesty was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. She ordered both boys to sit on the bed and for Jared to treat Jacob. The concubine asked to take care of him. The high priest gave in. He collected his thoughts and all the time thought that the guy was just a sick person for him who needed help. The high priest warned that if the cause was the poison he had drunk, he would be able to cure it. But if it was a congenital disease, he would be powerless. Jared's divine power healed Jacob, so it was poisoning, and someone did it on purpose. The high priest was furious. He demanded that this man be found, and whoever it was, he should suffer the same punishment. Her Majesty was shocked that the guy could say such a thing. The concubine said that he noticed the symptoms 2 days ago, and during this period he noticed something strange. He was brought mushroom soup several times in a row, although in the harem the menu changes every day. Jared couldn't understand why this particular focus was being made, since the man in the temple had been eating the same thing for a week. Sharon suggested gathering all the members of the imperial palace and asking them to confess who gave the poisoned soup. But the high priest was against this idea, as he believed that it was necessary to preserve the reputation of Master Jacob. The Empress agreed with the boys and decided to conduct a secret investigation. The first thing she did was go to the kitchen to find out who the mushroom soup was originally prepared for. The cook said that it was intended for Prince Archie. The girl wondered if someone had deliberately changed the soup that contained poison, or if it had originally been intended for Archie. But perhaps the soups had been accidentally switched along the way. Her Majesty began to guess who it could be. Mr. Brian came to her mind. But then she decided that he was not capable of something like that. But his servant could very well have done something like that. Or one of the concubines did it. Sharon ordered the chef to make the same mushroom soup as that day, and let it cool so that it tasted like it had been made several days ago, not just now. A rumor spread throughout the palace that Jacob had eaten mushroom soup a couple of days earlier and had fallen ill, and Her Majesty was so angry about the situation that she took the remains of the soup for herself to examine. These rumors reached Brian's servant, and the boy became frightened, because the Empress was known for her ruthlessness towards the guilty, and, moreover, Mr. Jacob was the son of a high-ranking official. The guy was afraid to even imagine what would happen to him if they found out that he was the one trying to harm. The treasurer reported to Her Majesty that rumors had spread, and the entire harem was discussing what had happened. The Empress asked that all the concubines, except Jacob, be invited to the banquet hall. Harem, banquet hall. The concubines were acting as usual, seeming to have become close since the time Jared had healed Austin, and the servants were as friendly with each other as their masters. Brian felt uncomfortable in a crowded place as always. The Empress entered the hall and began to say that those gathered had probably heard the rumors circulating around the palace and knew why she had gathered them here. She called Austin over and asked him to open the lid of the dish. There was mushroom soup in front of the guy. Sharon said that each of those present should eat 2 spoons of this soup. The crowd began to riot. Remember what happened to Jacob after that? The Empress insisted on her own, arguing that Jacob had not died, but was merely ill. Austin was the first to try the soup. Then Her Majesty called Carl. The concubine also ate. There was some bickering. Prince Archie winced a little, but also ate his 2 spoons. The last one to eat the soup was Lord Brian, but he also ate it without further ado. After all the concubines had tried it, the Empress even gave this soup to all the servants and other courtiers to try. But everyone was either afraid that they would get sick like Jacob, or grimaced from the taste of spoiled soup. None of them behaved suspiciously. Sharon had no idea who the traitor was. The girl decided to walk alone. No matter how much Ethan tried to pretend to be a foreign ambassador, his first duty was to be an emperor. Even when he saw his beloved's concubine so obediently helping him carry his luggage, he felt completely calm, because the emperor was really good at self-control. Austin was very keen to learn as much as possible about the Empress's former lover. The concubine suggested that Ethan come in and have a cup of coffee. If he doesn't drink coffee, he can have tea. And if he doesn't feel like drinking tea, he can have alcohol. The emperor thanked him for the offer, but politely declined, citing the fact that his people would be worried about his sudden absence. Austin was persistent, not accepting the foreigner's refusals. He decided for him that they would go and have a cup of coffee. Ethan began to list all the tastes and habits of Empress Sharon. He immediately guessed what the matter was. The emperor realized that the concubine had deliberately told him his name and offered to help with the luggage, only pretending that it was a simple coincidence. Finally, he said that kisses should be on the forehead, lips, cheeks in that order. At that moment, the Empress approached unnoticed, and both sides were confused by the unexpected meeting. Sharon, without saying a word, looked menacingly at the Emperor, and he silently followed her, while the concubine remained standing in the corridor. Ethan walked and thought about how much time had passed since the last time he and Sharon walked through these corridors together. He hoped that she was thinking about it now, too. Finally, she turned to the guy and asked why he didn't tell her. The Emperor didn't understand whether it was really that important now. She hated traitors and told her ex-lover so, but he sarcastically said that no one liked them. Her Majesty was serious. If Ethan knows everything, then why does he lie all the time? She asked him. The guy began to justify himself, saying that her concubine approached him first and offered help. Emperor Vallejo noticed that Austin was wagging his tail to get her love, and he was also very good at taking advantage and hitting her right in the heart. Ethan continued his monologue, not letting Sharon speak. He believed that a bad master is one who only takes but does not give love in return. And that is what happened with the Empress's harem. Having gathered handsome men around her, she could not give even a piece of her love, because none of them had the same brown hair and gray eyes as him, Ethan concluded. Sharon just remained silent. After some time spent in complete silence, Her Majesty told him not to dare to condemn Austen so unceremoniously, since the concubine was ready to die for her and was only trying to be loved. Unlike Ethan, who knew his love was following him and took advantage of it so brazenly, however, Sharon hoped that the guy would no longer spend time with her men. The conversation with Ethan worried the Empress and deprived her of sleep, but she decided to focus on current affairs, and time flew by. The individuals who had been helping Fred with outside force were still unknown, so Her Majesty decided not to dwell on just one thing, especially since the delegation from Vallejo would be leaving soon, and she would be able to live as before again. The commander asked Sharon if everything was okay. She replied that she was, but she needed to take a little walk to digest everything. Gordon said that he would go with her. While walking through the garden, Her Majesty touched the grass. It was the same grass from which Ethan had once made her a ring. At that moment, the girl realized that she had still not forgotten him. Sharon burst into Jacob's room. The concubine was already asleep. He woke up abruptly and didn't understand what she was doing there. The Empress said she missed him. Pulling him towards her, she kissed him passionately. The kiss was long. During the kiss, the concubine felt something wet on his face. He looked at Her Majesty. She was crying. Jacob decided that she disliked kissing him so much that she started crying, but the girl began to shift all the blame onto him. So instead of answering her, he pulled away. The Empress also thought about Jacob's presence in the harem, because he is here because his father put pressure on him. She is wasting her nerves on the guy, since he is the son of a high-ranking official. But Jacob himself may be uncomfortable even with the fact that she came here. Sharon stood up to leave. She told the concubine that if he didn't like it, then so be it. A servant immediately ran into Jacob's room, and he informed his master that when Her Majesty left the room, she was upset and asked him to console her master. The gentleman grinned, not believing that the Empress could be worried about him after she had been so disgusted by kissing him that she had even started crying. The girl didn't want to continue this quarrel in the harem, so she pretended that nothing had happened. She couldn't shake the feeling that Ethan was watching her, or at least she was imagining it. It turned out to be true. The Emperor was indeed watching Sharon. When she went out onto the balcony, she didn't see anyone under her windows, and thought that of course he wouldn't be watching her. Otherwise, how long would he have had to stand there? Ethan regretted coming to Columbia. He himself no longer understood what he wanted to check out when he came here. In the corridor, the Emperor met his knight, who reported to him that Empress Sandra continued to talk nonsense about Caleb having returned, and that the death of her maid was also the work of Prince Caleb. Sandra's father was sure that his daughter had a fever, and that she herself did not understand what she was talking about due to her clouded mind. Ethan decided it was time to return home. Sharon was walking through some dark place where not even light penetrated. She did not understand whether it was a dream or a reality, but it was very cold in this place because it was underground. She walked, and the landscape around her was still the same. This place was very similar to a labyrinth. A man in a fox mask appeared before the Empress and placed his finger on her lips, indicating that she should remain silent. The guy suddenly began to undress. After he took off his robe, he threw it over Sharon, as if trying to hide it from someone. Through the fabric, she saw her half-brother. Was he really alive? He walked and talked to those around him in masks. The conversation was about his mother, who was locked in the tower, and about Sharon herself and her bad character. He believed that the Empress was mocking his mother. The prince said that he must save her. Having removed the mantle from the Empress, the fox said that her time had not yet come, and he would take the girl to the palace. Her Majesty was so angry that she tore the mask from the stranger's face and revealed her concubine, Lord Brian. The Empress woke up in the park on a bench. Brian was standing next to her. The girl was confused. She did not remember how she ended up there, but the concubine said that he got up early, decided to take a walk, and saw her lying there. The doctor arrived and Carl came with him, examined Her Majesty. The doctor did not notice any injuries, except that Her Majesty was walking around barefoot and in light pajamas. The concubines offered to escort the girl to the palace, but she decided to go with the king of mercenaries. Carl carried the Empress on his shoulders. Sharon felt sorry that her lover had to carry a person practically on his chest, but it was quite comfortable. Her head was occupied with the fox. Why did he save her twice? At first she thought that this guy was trying to scare her, but if this incident was just a dream, Her Majesty did not understand why the fox saved her in a dream. The concubine asked the Empress if she remembered that all sorts of flowers grew on the sides of the stairs, and that when descending the steps, one could see how their house connected to the lake, where the lady wet her feet and played in the water. But when he did not hear an answer, Carl realized that Her Majesty was sleeping, and it was unlikely that she remembered all this. Her Majesty was informed that her elder brother Leon had arrived. He received the letter and came immediately, as he was worried that something serious had happened, since his sister was asking him to look after state affairs. Sharon said that she was going to visit Vallejo. Leon was very surprised. He immediately thought that it was Ethan, but the girl began to deny this fact, but did not know whether to tell him the real reason or not. The Empress didn't know if everything would be okay if she told her brother about the old map and that warlock spy. It wasn't that she didn't trust him, but that there was still a lot to learn and figure out. The prince accepted the fact that his sister was hiding something and asked how she planned to get there. Sharon explained that she would go with the delegation. Strengthening friendly relations between the delegations was a valid reason for the visit. Leon looked very displeased. Sharon asked him if he was aware that there were very few people who reacted to her words the same way he did. His brother replied that a loyal servant would not give up being straightforward, even if it spoiled the Empress's mood, especially since she was his sister, and he was worried. At such moments she wanted to live with her older brother and mother as before. Leon was interested in how long Sharon would be leaving the country. Her sister had no intention of spending much time in Vallejo, and although the process of searching and deciphering the map was a bit lengthy, she thought it would be much easier to find the place from the map. The prince thought for a moment, and after a few seconds asked if she would like to go there secretly, because if it didn't take much time, then it was worth the risk. Come to think of it, Ethan also came secretly, disguised as an ambassador from the delegation, and it wasn't for long, so it wasn't a bad option. Leon believed that if the Empress, who had just ascended to the throne, went with an embassy delegation without a special reason, her authority might be slightly shaken, especially since she still had not dealt with the remnants of Fred's followers. There was something else that the prince thought the Empress should be wary of. If she finished in a few days, then how was she going to secretly return without causing trouble? With Brian's birthday less than 2 weeks away, Sharon decided to address the issue upon returning from Vallejo. The prince approached the knight guarding Her Majesty's chambers and asked him to help his companion with the luggage, as it was too heavy. The knight, fearing that he would have to leave his post, agreed. Sharon crept quietly through the corridors of the palace and jumped out the window. She remembered her childhood, since as a child she was the best in terms of disobedience in the imperial family. Having sat down in the carriage, Her Majesty began to memorize the entire map while she had time, because it was unknown what could happen during her trip. She found the number 3 on the map. Brian helped her decipher almost the entire map, but she didn't even think about this number, especially since it would be difficult to understand its significance. There was some kind of sharp drop-off. The road was very steep. Sharon thought that at this rate the wheels would fly off before reaching their destination. A few seconds later it happened again. The knight transporting Her Majesty reported that a wheel had come off. He had a spare, but it would take time to change it. While waiting, the Empress enjoyed the night sky. The last time she allowed herself to do so was a long time ago. The sound of hooves was heard, and Sharon decided to hide so as not to be accidentally noticed and recognized. Judging by the sound of their hooves, there were 2 of them. The knight suggested asking them for help if they were not enemies. Her Majesty agreed, but judging by the pace at which the horses were racing, the people were in a hurry somewhere. The riders slowed down, seeing the predicament. They offered help. The voice of the man who spoke seemed very familiar to Sharon. She certainly couldn't have imagined that in such a situation she would end up in the same carriage with Ethan. The Emperor was ready to hear her story about what she was doing there, since only those who urgently needed to get to Vallejo traveled along this bumpy road at night. The guy suggested that Sharon was planning to hide her trip to Vallejo until the very end, but the girl muttered discontentedly that it had nothing to do with him, and she certainly didn't intend to harm him in any way. Ethan smiled, saying that even if she hurt him, he could turn a blind eye to it to some extent. Her Majesty asked him to stop talking nonsense and that she would leave here very soon. The Emperor was surprised that she was not heading to the capital, but Sharon asked to borrow his carriage and tried to find out everything along the way, but she still wouldn't tell him anything. A village near the border of Vallejo. Although the Empress received help with the repair of her carriage, she still did not want to leave any traces of herself here. It was unexpected, But from now on, Sharon decided never to ride in the same carriage with Ethan again. And she didn't want to sit face to face with him on a trip either. Or perhaps the fact that they were riding together was an opportunity given to them for the last time, Her Majesty thought. As an Empress, she told him everything she had planned, and now she needed to quickly find the thing that was marked on the map and return to Columbia. As it turned out, the climb was quite a long one, and Sharon thought that she might have to set up camp here today. The knight found the entrance to the cave and then got fire to light it. The man was not only good at flattery, but also excellent at his job. The Empress was definitely lucky to have him. If you believe the fairy tales or legends, then all sorts of traps must be installed in the dungeons. Because, as they say, only by passing difficult trials can one obtain treasures. The knight noticed that there was a lot of humidity in the cave, but overall, everything was fine. The cave seemed quite ordinary, but an old map of a ruined country put up for auction, and the criminals trying to get their hands on it haunted Sharon. So the dungeon could be as dangerous as in old fairy tales. It seems that Her Majesty has found what she was going for. She was surprised, was that all? She got here and nothing happened to her. She didn't want to be a little naive, but that was even good. Even if you pretend that it is an old thing, it looks like no one has been here and replaced it. Having opened the box, the Empress was even more surprised. There was a mask lying in front of her. She noticed something strange, unlike the box itself. It looked like something new, just made. Could it be that the enemies had gotten ahead of her and replaced the contents? The knight asked to see the mask. It was probably already dark outside, so they should find a place to stop inside here, Sharon thought. The knight called out to her, and turning around, the Empress saw a completely different person in front of her. The guy began to apologize, justifying himself by saying that no matter how you looked at it, the mask looked completely ordinary, so he decided to try it on. Finally, Her Majesty understood the essence of this mask. The knight's face changed as soon as he put on this mask, but he did not even understand anything. The mask was a face-changing one. Its location really should have been hidden on a dubious old map. Her Majesty did not show that she understood the meaning of the mask, saying that it was worth taking with her and showing it to the scientists. The next day after the night in the cave, Sharon was going to show this mask to the scientists, but she couldn't give them something so interesting right away. She didn't even know if she could somehow use this thing to identify the perpetrators. The Empress thought of Gordon, that he would be angry when he found out that she had gone so far in all this and had not told him anything. So, upon arrival, she made the decision to tell him everything. Upon returning, everyone in the palace went crazy after looking at the Empress, and she could not understand what was going on at all. In the corridor, she saw a completely different girl in front of her, but very similar to her. At the same time, in Vallejo, the first thing Ethan did after secretly returning with a delegation from Columbia was to examine the updated interior decoration of the Imperial Palace in honor of the change of seasons. The brilliant sculptor, who decided to make a name for himself for the first time in a long time, spent 5 years creating this masterpiece. Having removed the cloak from the statue, in front of the Emperor stood his love, Empress Sharon. The sculptor immediately hesitated. Something was wrong. This was clearly not what he had created. It looks like the dye hasn't washed out of Her Majesty's hair well, but she made it quickly, so it will probably take a few more days to wash it out. The Emperor didn't understand. Even after washing off the makeup, his face looked different. Sharon said that magic had changed it. Ethan wondered what had happened that had caused her to disguise herself as a statue and look for him, because after their meeting at the Vallejo border, he had assumed that Sharon would finish her business and return to Columbia. She did return, but her brother betrayed her. About 2 weeks ago, when she left the carriage with the Emperor at the border of Vallejo, and they separated. After that, Sharon, as she said, finished her business and returned to the palace. But something happened. There was some commotion in the palace. It turned out that at the same time, a false empress with exactly the same face was pretending to be Sharon, so no one could recognize her. So first of all, she met with the knight who accompanied her. They went to where Her Majesty had stopped just before entering the palace. While they were gone, Your Majesty's servants learned that Sharon had fallen ill and would be resting alone. Everything was exactly as she had said before leaving. When Prince Leon left the room, the warlock bewitched Her Majesty with his magic, which seems to be a form of witchcraft where one steals the appearance of a weakened person and tries to take his place. The other day, a spy who visited the old man who died a violent death was cursed and killed. The Empress's desire to prepare for atrocities has now tied her hand and foot. And it was precisely Leon who prevented her from making the official diplomatic visit that Her Majesty was planning. The knight was amazed. Could it really be that the Empress's brother had planned everything from the very beginning? Sharon didn't have time to be angry now. She needed to act one step faster than Leon. Her Majesty warned the knight that if her brother and the false Empress were in cahoots, they would also try to arrest him, because he was the very person who could prove the Empress's true whereabouts that day. Therefore, she ordered him to immediately leave the capital and find Gordon. She needed to meet him before her brother did. Sharon herself decided to return to the Imperial Palace to check something. The girl pretended to be a servant. There is always room for workers in the Imperial Palace, and that is why servants are recruited for the Imperial Palace every 3 months. Sharon changed her face with magic and made a disguise suitable for her status. It turned out to be easy, since she knew the entire hiring procedure, so everything was taken care of. Asking someone to write a letter of recommendation, preparing the necessary documents before the interview, all this was done in one fell swoop. But this false Empress knew much more about her than Sharon thought. It felt like she was looking in a mirror. Ultimately, the interview went without incident, and Her Majesty received notice of acceptance. The head of the maids gave Sharon instructions. Her Majesty had suddenly become unwell recently, so it was not worth getting on her nerves. She brought a wet towel into her room and found her concubine Carl on the bed next to the imposter. The imposter spoke about the need to bring the criminal to justice as quickly as possible, but she did not know what to do, since there were no records on this case. The concubine took her hand and assured her that she could rely on him and that he was always on her side. Sharon now realized that Carl knew the Empress was a fake. She had previously reproached him for this, but he insisted only more on calling her mistress. The concubine exclusively called the Empress lying in bed Your Majesty, and even several times. Carl met with Prince Leon. The latter asked how his sister was feeling. Right now, Sharon would have liked to rip that shameless face to pieces, but it was not yet time to butt heads with her brother. The Empress needed to meet with Carl as soon as possible, so she came to the garden where he often walked and began to wait for him. Someone called out to her from behind her. She turned around and saw the king of mercenaries standing in front of her. She was amazed how he found her and knew it was her. The guy said he recognized her by her smell. Taking his mistress's hand, the concubine kissed it. However, she had to adapt, because the guy was the only one who knew about her secret. Sharon asked her to step aside and sit down because they needed to talk. Carl put his arm around her and led her away. Prince Archie watched this and was furious, as he did not know the truth, and took it for the Empress's concubine flirting with another. Carl asked where Her Majesty had been all this time, but she did not tell the whole truth, saying only that she had business to attend to. Hugging Sharon, he asked what she wanted to tell him. The Empress asked to take off the imposter's shoes. After the concubine left, the false Empress and Leon called her over and asked her to take off her shoes, as if there could be anything special about a pair of cheap shoes. The prince was looking closely at these shoes, which means that this is why they told Sharon to take off her shoes. And accordingly, there is something special about the imposter's shoes, too. Perhaps she changed her face with a magical item. Therefore, if you take off the shoes of the false Empress, you will be able to find out who is pretending to be her. Charles said with confidence that Her Majesty could leave this entirely to him. The concubine said this with such confidence that Her Majesty trusted him without any doubt. But she was worried whether he would be able to persuade the false Empress. This arrogant, impudent shrew. The king of mercenaries invited the imposter to get comfortable. Sharon spied on them from the dressing room. She had already suffered enough for the guy to quickly ask her to lie down, because if you say something like that, even the false Empress will not resist. While the concubine was stalling for time, putting himself in order, the imposter fell asleep. Carl carefully took off her shoes when something unexpected happened. The false Empress opened her eyes, laughed, and asked if he had really met Sharon, and that was why this performance was necessary, and that she must be sitting somewhere, hiding, watching what was happening. The Empress felt as if she had been doused with cold water. She stood motionless, trying not to give herself away. The concubine pretended not to understand what the imposter was talking about, and began to make excuses, saying that it seemed to him that her shoes were tight. The girl said she wasn't stupid, and hadn't Sharon told him what would happen if he took off her shoes? The Empress was very angry that she had been deceived. She realized that the shoes were bait to lure her. The girl decided to come out of hiding, showing herself. Seeing her, the imposter began to take off her necklace. Her Majesty was speechless. Standing before her was none other than her mother, Shauna, former Empress of Columbia and Sharon's biological mother. Her Majesty pounced on her mother with questions about how it all happened, why she stole her face, and then deliberately accused her of practicing black magic. The woman began to apologize for frightening her, but asked her to also understand how her mother had no choice but to save her and her brother Leon. Sharon didn't understand what her mother was talking about, since Leon had gone away with the great sage and was doing what he liked. Shauna asked her to calm down, saying that she could transform into the vampire lord. Her Majesty laughed. She took her mother's words as a joke, but the woman was very serious. She knew that her daughter was investigating this case. A warlock, a dead man, a lord who is reborn once every 500 years. The daughter was furious. She couldn't believe that her own mother considered her a warlock. Shauna did not deny that it was possible. To be precise, the Empress was one of the main candidates for his place. Sharon couldn't calm down. Could it be that her brother had told this nonsense to his mother? But the woman began to defend him, since even Leon was not sure until the girl became the crown princess. After visiting the temple during his training with the great sage, he noticed the potential in his sister immediately after he learned of the imminent resurrection of the Lord. Everything came true as predicted. Her Majesty ascended the throne, and this led to bloodshed. The mother knew perfectly well that her daughter was trying to be a good ruler. But people were not simply cursed and killed within the walls of the imperial palace. There were also times when an entire village on the outskirts disappeared. Finally, Sharon calmed down a little and asked her mother if she really wanted to get rid of her now and live pretending to be her. Shauna began to deny this, explaining that it was necessary exactly until the moment they found out the truth. It turned out that Her Majesty was simply pausing, and she attacked her mother with great rage, shouting that she would not listen to this lie. That is why Shane had no choice but to arrange a conspiracy. Suddenly, someone shouted that the sorceress posing as Her Majesty was here, and Sharon had to run away urgently. The former Empress turned to Carl with a request. She asked him to follow her daughter and protect her. This is where Sharon ended her story, which is how she ended up with Ethan, since he is the only one, along with the knight she left with, who can prove her whereabouts that day. Emperor Vallejo thought that from the very beginning Leon had suspected that the girl could be a contender for the position of lord, and now he had dragged her mother into this too. Perhaps, from Shauna's point of view, instead of letting Leon get rid of Sharon on his own, it would be better to try to find a solution together, because she couldn't allow the fight between her children to leave only one alive. Ethan offered to bring the concubine who accompanied her. The guy seemed to read the Empress's thoughts. Taking her hand, he said in a flirtatious tone that if she needed anything else, she could contact him at any time. At the same time, at the Vallejo Hotel, Charles approached the hostess and asked if she had managed to meet with the Emperor of Vallejo. The place didn't even look like there was anything buried there, and the concubine didn't understand why Her Majesty was going to dig there, but she thought that this was where she would find the answer. She drew the sign of the Dark Forest Guild on the cobblestone, for the reason that it was said that if someone pretends to be someone else, then those who want revenge will certainly appear, and the Empress knew the secret code. The mercenary king didn't understand why Sharon wanted to run away. She wasn't a lord, and if she did as her mother said, waiting in the temple, then she could return peacefully. The Empress was worried that it might take too long to find a true lord, and whether she would be able to regain her position if she meekly folded her hands. There was also a good chance that Fred, who had become stronger, would strike first while she was hiding. Moreover, Her Majesty's close ones gathered in the temple for the sake of conspiracy, and after that she could not even look them in the eye. Deep down, Sharon was still worried that she might end up being a lord, and if that were the case, would her mother still try to save her? Carl was silent, not knowing what to answer. The Empress looked into his eyes. They were emerald color. She had heard somewhere that demons have exactly such eyes. Without expecting it from herself, she paid him a compliment. The concubine was embarrassed by the surprise. Her Majesty continued her monologue, saying that, be that as it may, if the temple walls could contain the awakening powers of the Lord, then she would have been locked there long ago. Probably the previous followers also had loved ones with whom they would like to peacefully spend the rest of their lives. In the Empress's opinion, her mother's proposal was full of pitfalls. It was quite cold outside. Carl took off his robe and covered Sharon with it. The mistress asked him how he would cope himself, since his hands and feet were always cold, but the concubine assured him that everything was fine. He was warmed by the thought that she was worried about him. She returned the robe to him, but the guy did not lose his composure, moved closer and hugged the Empress, covering her with the robe. Sharon wondered what his mother had told him before she had run away. Had she really promised to make him the Empress's husband if he protected her? Carl was more ambitious than he seemed, saying that he needed to think. Maybe he would remember if he found himself in her chambers. Although Her Majesty hoped for power and possible help, Card had a man he loved. A young girl whose hair was as scarlet as blazing sparks. The Empress was dejected. She knew that soon everything would be revealed, and that she could not just sit and wait for her death. Carl was attacked by men in black, but he was strong enough to deal with them alone. She remembered Sharon's words about the secret code. The concubine named it. The secret code consisted of 3 words: black market, flounder. After a while, none other than Austin showed up. May 17th, Columbia. 2 days after Sharon spoke to Ethan. Leon asked his mother not to be upset. She was only doing what was required, being a mother and Empress. It was not about her. Even if it had been him, Shauna would have done the same. The butler informed the imposter that Lord Brian had arrived to see her. She greeted him warmly, invited him in and made himself comfortable, and began by asking him how the concubine's day had gone and whether everything was well with him. The guy came to talk about his birthday. The false Empress was very surprised that Brian was not going to organize anything, because a birthday only happens once a year. But he did not think that he would be properly organizing a lavish celebration in such troubled times. Shauna laughed. The concubine turned out to be very thoughtful. She advised him not to forget to arrange a truly grand celebration next year. The woman considered his prudence a good quality, but it was not enough for him to be the Empress's husband. Brian plucked up the courage and asked if she had prepared what they had agreed on last time. The imposter pointed to the books. She thought that the guy was capable of getting any book he wanted, so she prepared something more rare for him. The concubine froze in complete bewilderment. Forcing a smile, he said he really enjoyed it and was grateful. Lord Brian returned to his room, and his servant immediately rushed to him with questions about whether everything had gone well. While rearranging a potted plant given to the concubine for his birthday, he said that there were rumors that Sir Charles had run away and was now madly in love with some servant girl. They said that Mr. Archie himself had stated this, and that is why everyone was whispering in the corners. The servant noticed that his master was not listening to him at all and had a lost look. He immediately rushed to him, trying to find out what had happened at dinner with Her Majesty. The Lord asked if the servant remembered the sorceress who pretended to be the Empress, but later escaped. And he finally added that it seemed to be true. The next morning, the Lord's estate. Brian's father was angry. He thought that his son's first birthday after appearing in royal circles would be truly wonderful. But if these rumors were true, then something irreparable would happen. The concubine's mother tried to calm her husband down. She believed that if it were someone else, then they wouldn't even have to think about these false stories. But their dear Brian was not like that. The woman continued that when Her Majesty had taken down Prince Fred, weren't they then forced out of their government positions after failing to distinguish themselves as much as Duke Mitchell had done? To the Lord and his wife, this all reminded them of a story from a fairy tale. It was certainly possible, but what if Prince Leon's supporters did not retreat, but seized the throne? While the Lord sat there without showing his emotions, his wife, on the contrary, was furious. She believed that no matter what Leon's goal was, it couldn't be left like that. The woman believed that if the two of them couldn't handle it, then they needed to join forces and resolve the issue. The Lord had no choice but to visit Duke Mitchell, although as soon as he imagined that impudent face, he was immediately overcome with rage. The castle of the commander's father. Gordon's father told the knight that they had set out on their journey yesterday, but that there were more than 1 or 2 roads leading to the imperial palace, and it was unknown which one they had taken. The knight was at a loss. He did not know what to do with Her Majesty's secret message. The boy followed the commander, thinking that if Gordon was not yet aware of the incident in the palace, then he probably took the usual path, and not the short, winding route. By evening, he caught up with the commander. The latter was about to set up camp for the night. The knight was about to call out to him, when he noticed that he was not alone. It was at this moment that Gordon was informed of the incident in the palace, and he gave the order to move out immediately, as there might still be warlocks there, simply hiding somewhere. If the knight continued to stand there, he would definitely not reach the commander, but he did not know what to do. He urgently needed Her Majesty's help. Vallejo. Sandra's maid was outraged by the emperor's actions. In her opinion, he was really overdoing it. Not only did he not have to prepare for the divorce he himself had started, but he was also bringing uninvited girls into the palace. In the corridor of the palace, Empress Sharon was talking with a concubine. At the end of the dialogue, Her Majesty shouted Carl's name. Sandra heard all this from the side. She could not believe her ears. The Empress invited the concubine to come in. The guy wanted to tell her something. Empress Sandra ran up to them. She was at a loss, asking if it was really him, Carl. The concubine looked at Sharon and said he had no idea who it was. Sandra stood there, not taking her eyes off him, and asked in a surprised tone how he didn't know who she was. Charles asked Her Majesty to come to her chambers. She agreed. At that moment, Sandra fainted. The maid attacked Sharon and Carl, accusing them of being to blame for everything, and despite the fact that they were the Emperor's guests, this did not give them the right to harm Empress Sandra. Her Majesty began to apologize, saying that there must have been some misunderstanding. Emperor Vallejo himself appeared, looked at the servant and said that she had no right to speak like that to his guests. Ethan ordered his wife to be taken to her quarters, not to stand there. Sharon thought about it. She had of course heard that Ethan and his wife had a bad relationship, but now she was convinced of it herself. After resting in her room, Sandra sat and drank tea with her husband. He said that excessive stress causes weakness, so the doctor advised her to rest more to recover faster. Ethan reminded his wife of the letter he received from Empress Sharon. He continued that in fact, not long ago, the girl had secretly sent her confidant to properly discuss this issue and these people whom Sandra had encountered in the corridor. The Emperor also said that, in truth, there is only one person close to the Empress of Columbia, and the second is her lover. It had to be something serious, so Sandra suggested discussing it tomorrow morning. Sharon stood in the garden and thought about how, as soon as she first moved into the same room with Carl, he dreamed of his beloved again. It was beyond comprehension and resembled some kind of play. Her thoughts were interrupted by footsteps. She looked out and saw some guy. He looked strange and walked as if he was hypnotized. Having discovered that he was being followed, the boy transformed into some kind of monster and attacked the Empress. She began to fight back, but suddenly she felt a surge of strength and easily fought him off. As soon as the monster received a counterattack, it immediately ran very quickly into the forest, making it almost impossible to catch up with it. Sharon noticed Carl heading towards her. The Empress was not in the room, and he decided to go out into the courtyard to look for her, when suddenly he heard some noise. She said that she couldn't sleep, and decided to take a little walk. But then she noticed a suspicious young man, and chased after him. He was clearly not an ordinary person. The concubine became indignant at her recklessness, and to calm him down, Sharon took the guy by the hand and led him back to the palace. The next morning. From the very morning, the situation was not what it should be. If Sharon had not known who they were, she would certainly have thought that they were not a married couple, but enemies. Sharon introduced herself as a secret envoy of the Empress of Columbia, and they had come to deliver a secret message in person. Sandra looked at Carl with such concern that the Empress hoped that the concubine had not deceived her, and that he really did not know her. Carta introduced himself as the concubine of the Empress of Columbia, and Sandra continued to stare at him. Sharon asked that since they were both special envoys, could they please keep the fact that Mr. Carl was here a secret? Ethan said it was time to finish the introductions and invited them to sit down at the table to have breakfast and discuss all the details. Although the atmosphere in the air was quite tense, there shouldn't have been any problems getting the message across. Her Majesty asked that they had surely heard of a lord who was reborn every 500 years. After the elder of the priests who tried to contact the high priest was also killed, suspicions about the possible resurrection of the Lord grew stronger. Finally, Empress Sandra spoke, saying that after listening to their story, she was glad that she did not consider herself crazy, because when Caleb showed up, he was just talking to her, hiding in the shadows. When her maid died and her body disappeared, Sandra began to believe that Caleb ate her corpse, as she felt that he wanted to make himself more visible. Sharon thought for a moment, then said that perhaps the two had even held hands with the Empress of Vallejo. The Emperor didn't understand which two she was talking about, but she was talking about Caleb and Fred. Charles said that although His Majesty believed that Prince Fred was the Lord, one thing was clear. Even if the two were alive, they would have to be killed again. Sandra agreed with his words. Sharon would like to resolve this issue together, but already while in Columbia. Whatever it takes, They are ready to cooperate, Sandra supported. Sharon was very glad that their conversation took place, and that Ethan's wife was ready to kill her lover again. The Empress offered the concubine lunch, asking him what he would like. Carl suggested ordering duck for lunch, which Her Majesty loved so much. The girl said that she didn't like duck meat at all, and the concubine was very surprised to hear this. Sharon laughed and asked him not to believe any rumors, otherwise he might get into trouble. Suddenly Sandra appeared asking to speak alone with Carl. The concubine replied that if she wanted to discuss matters of state importance, it would be better if she did so alone with the lady. But if it was something personal, then as a concubine he had no right to speak about it. After saying this, he took Her Majesty by the arm and led her away. Colombia, capital. The commander first went to the Empress's room, where the imposter was already waiting for him. She said how sorry she was that the guy had to constantly overwork himself so much. At that moment, Gordon noticed something unclean. The false Empress sent the commander to rest, as she was convinced that he was fine and needed to gain strength. Leon caught up with Gordon and asked him to step away for a moment to talk. The prince noticed that the commander looked a little strange during the audience with the Empress, but the boy brushed it off, saying that he was simply tired after the journey. Smiling, the prince said that Gordon must have felt awkward being so close to the Empress, since it was actually a double. The commander couldn't believe his ears. Leon admitted that all this fuss about the false Empress was his doing. The commander was furious. He did not understand why the prince had arranged all this, but Leon explained that there was a suspicion that the Lord was Sharon. The reason they were suspicious of Her Majesty was because of an order issued earlier. The prince assured that if Sharon was not a lord, then everything would return to normal. But if, on the contrary, she could be imprisoned in the temple before the world was in danger. Leon knew how Gordon valued the Empress, but now something else was more important. Even when the Emperor himself ordered an investigation into his daughter, it was the commander who objected. But nevertheless, the prince wanted Gordon to help him, and acted as if nothing had happened so as not to raise a panic. The commander said that he understood everything. An inn in the capital of Colombia. Gordon was interested in who this woman was who ruled in place of Her Majesty, but the prince did not tell everything, saying that he would tell her later. The commander was surprised by the fact that Leon was asking for help and was not going to reveal his most important cards. But something here was not clear to him. Gordon was brought his order. There was some kind of note on the plate. Opening it, he recognized a familiar handwriting. The note said that they would wait for him every midnight under a huge tree next to the watermill at the western gate. Arriving at the designated place, he saw a tied-up knight, and at that very moment someone hit him on the head. Leon was behind all this, laughing. He said that he didn't want to do this to his childhood friend. But what can you do if he doesn't trust him? The knight, swinging on his chair, pushed the guard, who fell along with the lantern. The glass broke, and the straw in the barn caught fire. The guy did this on purpose to save the commander. He started shouting at him to run. The knight was caught and imprisoned. Leon discussed what had happened with the treasurer. The treasurer believed that the guy should be pardoned, since he most likely also fell for the hook. The prince believed that they should always be on guard, since the likelihood of this happening in the future was high. At least that's what Leon and Sharon's father thought. Leon advised the treasurer to be careful, as one day he might be accused of aiding the warlock if he continued to stand up for him. Gordon could not betray Her Majesty, no matter how much he loved her, but he would never have conspired. The treasurer decided to immediately find the commander to talk to him. A voice came from behind the man, asking if he was waiting for someone. Turning around, the treasurer was dumbfounded. Vallejo? Her Majesty was interested in whether the assassin from the Dark Forest Guild had met with Austin. The concubine replied that he was quite experienced, so it was only a matter of time. Sharon believed that if she could meet Austin, Brian, or the High Priest, she might be able to convince the other concubines. But Carl believed that the High Priest was dangerous because he was a temple minister. The Empress believed that this would actually play into their hands, since the High Priest was not the kind of person who would calmly tolerate someone's bad behavior. The girl noticed that there were no traces of the monster in the forest, which was very strange. Sharon was still wondering if Carl was definitely not acquainted with Empress Sandra, but this question was already beginning to irritate the concubine. He did not understand the Empress's reaction, since some girl in her presence was constantly glancing at her lover, and she did not care at all. The concubine asked Her Majesty if she was not at all bothered by the fact that he might be looking at others. Carl, of course, didn't do this. but he hoped that Sharon wouldn't just let it go, since he considered himself a handsome and distinguished man. The concubine grabbed the Empress sharply, pulling her closer to him to prove that he liked being restrained. Sharon started to run. She was surprised by such a reaction. Before, the king of mercenaries was not so impudent. In the hallway, she met Sandra again. Empress Vallejo pounced on the concubine, grabbed him by the shirt, and asked him to look at her, begged him. Sharon had to intervene. She asked to let Carl go and resolve everything calmly, but the guy didn't want to find out anything. After some time, she finally managed to persuade them to talk in a calm environment and discuss everything. Sandra started talking first. Since they appeared in the palace, she constantly had the same dream where they were together. The girl decided that this was her past life. Carl asked again if he understood correctly that in a past life, he and Her Majesty Empress Vallejo had been in a relationship. She began to deny it, saying that only she was in the relationship, not him. This was even stranger. Now Sharon did not understand anything at all and asked to explain what the girl was talking about. Caleb came to Sandra again, and she asked him if there was anyone else here who was not human. The guy smiled, saying that there was one strange man. Our monsters were where her guests were located. Biting her lip, the girl thought that they were talking about Carl. Caleb was surprised by her courage, because Sandra was so scared when she first saw him, as if she had never seen anything like him before. And now she was so bold that she had the conscience to ask if there was anyone like him. Ignoring his words, she asked the guy to come to her more often. Caleb recalled how Sandra had been bitten a long time ago, and then added that it was now clear who loved whom more. The next day, Carl's morning began with a knock on the door. Sandra was standing in front of him again. She immediately told him that he was not human. The Empress asked the concubine to deal with this herself. Having called Sandra for a talk, Sharon immediately asked her not to take everything to heart, and then showed that the girl was visiting them too often. She asked her not to come so often, since Sir Carl was uncomfortable. Empress Vallejo said that in her past life she loved Charles to death, and that is why she behaves this way. Sharon asked if she had considered that these might not be her memories. The Empress laughed, saying that it was time for her to go. Returning to the room, the Empress assured the concubine that everything had gone well, and Sandra would no longer bother him so often. Sharon was sitting in the garden enjoying the birds singing when her solitude was interrupted by Sandra's maid, who asked her if she was ready for the annual festival. Her Majesty did not understand what festival was being discussed, but did not show it. The maid said that she had heard that Sharon had not brought any dress with her, so she could lend her hers to the festival. Ethan was against Sharon wearing this dress because he had sent her so many dresses, but the Empress did not want to fuel rumors and bring trouble to Emperor Vallejo. The guy thought it was reasonable and agreed. Then they moved on to the topic of conversation that Sharon wanted to talk about. She said that on the morning of the day when she met Sandra, she noticed a monster in the yard. The girl drew him from memory and showed the drawing to the Emperor. His face immediately changed. The drawing was of his late brother Caleb. Sharon thought it was him, since Sandra said that the guy often visited her. Having offered to catch him, Her Majesty received practically a refusal. Ethan believed that no one would believe her, since no one except her and Sandra had seen the guy. Everyone needed solid evidence. Ethan was planning to make an official announcement as soon as they got rid of the fake Empress, and Sharon was waiting for someone to contact her to help her get back. The Empress noticed that Ethan was looking at her without taking his eyes off her. She quickly got ready, saying that since they had discussed everything, she had to go. But the Emperor intended to see her off, despite her excuses. Ethan often thought that things could have turned out much better if the letters he sent had reached Her Majesty. Ignoring his question, the girl asked if he had figured out who had stolen them, to which she received a negative answer. Sharon's investigation also yielded no results, since during this period a false Empress appeared. Suddenly freezing in place, the girl shouted to the Emperor that it was he. He turned around and began to look at her, not understanding what she was talking about. The Empress pounced on him with accusations that it was Leon who suspected him of being the Lord, and not her. Sharon received a prophecy from a great sage when she was still the crown princess. She has imperial qualities, but for the empire to achieve its prosperity, it will have to pay with blood. That's when it all started. That's when Leon began to doubt his sister. At the same time, Ethan first found himself on the throne, causing a bloody massacre, and doubts began to creep in regarding him. The prince began to think about who the real lord was. The Emperor was extremely surprised by what he heard. He asked Sharon if it was really her brother who was stealing all the letters. Then everything worked out for her. Leon was the crown prince and he would have the courage to do it. Ultimately, Sharon concluded that her brother had done this so that they could not be together if Ethan turned out to be a lord. Columbia. All the newspapers carried the news that the commander had attempted to desecrate Her Majesty's honor along with the sorceress. However, this news reached Prince Leon and he was able to prevent it, but the current whereabouts of the criminals still remains unknown. A large reward was promised to anyone who brought him to the palace alive. After reading the news, Shauna told her son that if after all this Sharon tried to kill him, then there was nothing she could do. But the prince was not worried about this. He believed that someone had to take on the role of the villain. Father Brian's estate. Duke Mitchell had some doubts about whether Brian had made a mistake, but the Lord was confident in his son and his sincerity to Her Majesty. In any case, the Duke considered Brian's character a little wayward, but now the talk was about starting a search for Her Majesty, if she had escaped from the false Empress. The Duke believed that the younger Lord should be closely watched and that no attempt should be made to interfere in the situation, but that he should be kept as close to the false Empress as possible. Brian's servant brought him a letter from his father, and the news that the latter had spoken with Duke Mitchell, and they had decided that Brian should pretend to be unaware of the existence of the false Empress and get as close to her as possible. After thinking, the Lord said that he would do as his father told him, but he had one request. The concubine wrote a letter, sealed it, and asked a servant to send this letter to Jacob. Jacob immediately received a letter stating that a false Empress was currently in power. He would find the real one, and in the meantime, he asked the concubine to stay away from her. Jacob's servant panicked. If this was true, then what to do if Her Majesty came to visit? The master ordered him to say, in that case, that he was ill. A few days later, Austin acted as if nothing had happened, only discussing the fact that the head of the mercenaries had suddenly abandoned his beloved, that Master Jacob had locked himself within 4 walls due to illness. And meanwhile, the naive Lord Brian sacredly believed in Her Majesty's love, and that only he and the high priest were doing as usual. The concubine asked his servant to go to the kitchen and find out what was for dinner today. The boy was amazed at how his master could think so calmly about food when such things were happening around him. Austin laughed, saying that he must eat well and take care of himself so that he would be in top shape when Her Majesty arrived. At that very second, a dagger with a note stuck into the tree, almost hitting the concubine's face. The note contained a code containing words such as black market, flounder, pass the cream puffs to icy Austin. The concubine, with a smile on his face, said that a false Empress was currently in power. His servant began to ask where the real one was. Austin replied that, apparently, she was in Vallejo. Jacob sat at dinner with a very dissatisfied look. He was not happy with the uninvited guests. Austin and the high priest decided to visit the concubine. Jacob asked to get straight to the point, and since he decided to bypass all the politeness, Austin declared that a false Empress was currently in power, and most likely Jacob was also aware of it. That's why the chief of the Dark Forest wanted to discuss this with people who knew everything. The guy had a question regarding the location of the Empress, but even Austin didn't know this, or simply didn't want to reveal all his cards yet. Jacob believed that they should bring the real Empress, but Austin disagreed with him, as Leon was in cahoots with the imposter. The high priest decided to take the floor. It was quite unexpected for him, and he was aware of the whole situation. But he had a question about how they would be able to stop the false Empress. The Dark Forest chief had a plan. They would need St. Robert's help. Archie was informed that Mr. Austin and the high priest had gone to visit the sick Jacob. The prince didn't understand what the servants saw as the problem. He considered them to be simple idiots who had lost Her Majesty's favor, so they decided to organize a gathering where they would sit and console each other. Deep down, the concubine thought that they hadn't invited him because they didn't like him, but he was offended that they couldn't even admit it. But in any case, he believed that it wasn't they who hadn't invited him, but he himself wouldn't have agreed. Sharon was curious about what ultimately happened to Sandra's nanny and whether her older brother was involved. The maid brought a dress for the girl and asked her not to forget to give the dressmaker the measurements so that she could prepare everything before the banquet began. A few days later, the eve of the festival, Carl was combing his mistress's hair when he suddenly began to fall asleep. The concubine asked if everything was okay, but the girl laughed and said that she always fell asleep when he did that. The dress was already completely ready. Carl asked if everything was really okay with it. Sharon assured him that it was, because she had been looking at it for so long. Palace of Vallejo reception hall. The couple were introduced as guests of His Majesty. Those gathered whispered that the Emperor was getting a divorce because of Sharon, while she actually wanted to avoid attracting attention at the banquet. Carl began to calm her down, promising that he would always be there. The Empress joked with him that he would only be around until Lady Sandra appeared again, and then the rumors would increase even more. The girl spoke with Emperor Ethan, asking him not to approach her during the banquet. She was sure that if nothing happened during this time, the rumors would disappear on their own, in which case, Carl asked her not to leave him. During the banquet, someone deliberately stepped on the hem of Sharon's dress and part of it came off. Everyone began to whisper that she had planned this on purpose to attract the Emperor's attention. Her Majesty realized that this had all been set up from the very beginning by Sandra's maid. Panic broke out in the hall. People ran in different directions. There was a monster at the banquet. At first glance, he looked nothing like Fred or Caleb, as if he had risen from the dead. The maid in the night began to restrain Sandra, but she rushed towards this monster, shouting her name. Sharon immediately guessed that this was the servant of the Empress of Vallejo, whose body had disappeared. She was not like those cemetery monsters, because they looked like ordinary people. It will be dangerous if the girl turns out to be a zombie. As far as Her Majesty knew, zombies are formed after an infection enters the bloodstream. Another man who looked like a monster tried to attack Empress Sandra. At that moment, Ethan pulled out his sword and hit the monster straight in the head. He rushed to his wife to find out if she was safe, and if everything was okay with her. Sharon's mind immediately flashed with hope that there would be no more infected. But it was in vain, since Sandra's nanny was covered in blood when she came in, and it was unknown how many more were like her on the street. Sharon and Ethan decided that they had to stop them at any cost. The Empress ordered the concubine to subdue the remaining monsters, while she went and found a place to take the people. Among the crowd, Her Majesty noticed the main monster. It was Prince Caleb. Those present could not believe their eyes, because he was dead, but Sharon was worried about something else, that the prince was much stronger than other monsters. He had intelligence. She decided that she should hit him in the neck, but the guy was very strong and fought well. She remembered that the only person she could not defeat was Sir Gordon, and even then she won once. Also in this situation, you should approach it correctly, and the job is in the bag. Suddenly, Sharon was blinded by a flash. At first, she did not understand what had happened, but then she discovered that Caleb had escaped. The Empress sat down and thought about her mistakes. She regretted not having cut his throat, even though the guy had exceeded all expectations. Ethan thanked the girl for the fact that the danger was over, but she was unhappy, since Caleb managed to escape. But it turned out that she had seriously wounded him and he would probably lie low for the near future. Sharon thought to herself that it wasn't her who dealt the final blow. It all happened so quickly, but there was a feeling that something had come out of her. The Emperor decided to first isolate the injured and infected in the palace. Fortunately, the massacre only took place in the banquet hall. The people gathered around Sharon and everyone looked at her with happiness in their eyes. It turned out that they considered her a savior because she was able to defeat the resurrected one. Coming close to Sandra's maid, she whispered words of gratitude in her ear because the fact that she cut her dress made it much more convenient to fight. Her Majesty was interested in how Lady Sandra was now, because Caleb was her fiancé. The next morning, in the ministerial meeting room, the Emperor announced that he had foreseen that this could happen, and had therefore taken a number of preparatory measures, including inviting a special envoy who had come for this purpose, introducing Sharon to everyone. Society now considered the girl a hero. Carl couldn't even imagine that they would be the first to know about everything here. The Empress agreed with him, since her plans were to first get rid of the false Empress. While it was still unknown who exactly Caleb was pursuing, the Emperor or the Empress, one thing was clear. As long as he was alive, he would appear more than once. In the worst case, the prince will try to turn the country into a real zombie lair, so that no one can take possession of what he failed to do. Sharon was informed that Her Majesty Sandra was looking for her. The maid reported to Sandra's father about what was happening. She saw what actually happened and that Caleb was wounded not by Sharon, but by his daughter. The Duke's face darkened. It seemed like the truth, and all because of Sandra's power. One day, the father visited his daughter in the temple, and the priest said that they were looking for an adversary who could overcome the approaching darkness. There was a high probability that it was Mrs. Sandra, after which the priest asked permission to examine her. The maid suggested revealing the truth to everyone, but the Duke was against it, as he knew that it would not end with just praise. Everything was much more serious.